The Haemonculi stand as living relics of the Eldari race's greatest catastrophe, when the psychic birth scream of Slaanesh tore through reality during the fall, consuming the souls of countless billions and transforming the Eldari core worlds into the roiling madness of the Eye of Terror. These ancient beings endured. Many Haemonculi claim to have walked the streets of Commorragh before the fall, when it existed merely as a hidden port city within the webway, a refuge for the most depraved elements of Eldari society. Their survival was not through luck or divine intervention, but through their already developed mastery over flesh and their willingness to embrace the darkest aspects of their nature. While other Eldari fled on craft worlds or transformed into the scattered exodites, the Haemonculi retreated deeper into the webway's shadowed passages, establishing themselves as the undisputed masters of biological manipulation within Commorragh's twisted spires. These creatures represent something fundamentally different from the Kabbalite warriors and archons who dominate much of Commorragh's political landscape. Where typical Drukhari rely on raiding and soul drinking to sustain themselves against the eternal hunger of she who thirsts, the Haemonculi have developed their own methodology. Their laboratories, known as flesh foundries, serve as workshops where the screams of their subjects provide sustenance through a more direct route. The Haemonculi have refined the art of extracting suffering to such a degree that they can feed upon the psychic emanations of agony itself, drawing nourishment from the terror and torment they inflict. This process differs from the soul drinking practiced by other Drukhari in its immediacy and intensity. A Kabbalite warrior might drain the essence from a dying captive in moments, but a Haemonculus can sustain themselves for extended periods by maintaining their victims in states of exquisite suffering, harvesting their anguish like a farmer tends crops. The physical transformation that marks a Haemonculus sets them apart from their kin. Over millennia of self-experimentation and modification, these beings have reshaped their own bodies into forms that barely resemble the elegant Eldari physiology. Some elongate their limbs to spider-like proportions, the better to reach into the cavities of their subjects. Others graft additional appendages onto their torsos, creating forests of specialized surgical tools that emerge directly from their flesh. Their skin often takes on unnatural hues, pallid whites or bruised purples, stretched tight over modified bone structures. Many wear elaborate suits of surgical equipment that blur the line between clothing and integrated augmentation, tubes and wires threading through their bodies to connect with arcane devices. Their faces, when visible beneath ornate masks and breathing apparatus, display the consequences of their work. Lipless mouths filled with needle teeth, eyes replaced with multi-lensed optical arrays, or features smoothed away entirely in favor of blank expanses of scarred tissue. The true genius of the Haemonculi lies not merely in their ability to reshape living flesh, but in their conquest of death itself. Through techniques developed over thousands of years, each Haemonculus maintains multiple insurance policies against their own demise. The Crucible, a device of their own creation, serves as a resurrection engine. Within these Baroque mechanisms, genetic templates and consciousness imprints wait in stasis, ready to generate a new body should the original meet its end. The process is not instantaneous, and a Haemonculus emerging from their crucible may find themselves weakened, their memories of recent events fragmented or unclear. Yet this represents a form of immortality that even the most powerful archons cannot claim without Haemonculi assistance. Some ancient Haemonculi maintain multiple crucibles scattered throughout Commorragh and beyond, hidden in forgotten corners of the webway where even their rivals cannot locate them. The phylactery serves a complementary function, storing the essential consciousness and memories of its owner. These devices take countless forms, from crystalline matrices to preserved organs suspended in alchemical solutions. A Haemonculus might embed their phylactery within the body of a loyal rack servant, hide it within the architecture of their laboratory, or even implant it within an unknowing victim released back into Commorragh's streets. The most paranoid specimens create elaborate networks of backup phylacteries, each containing slightly different versions of their consciousness, ensuring that some aspect of their being will survive even the most thorough attempts at their destruction. This redundancy has allowed certain Haemonculi to persist for so long that they remember the Eldari Empire at its height, when gods walked among mortals and the galaxy trembled before their race's power. The relationship between Haemonculi and the cabals that dominate Commorragh's political structure remains complex and often antagonistic. Most Haemonculi reject the notion of swearing allegiance to any archon, viewing the political machinations of the cabals as crude and ultimately futile. The Haemonculi witnessed the fall, saw the consequences of unchecked ambition and excess, yet they draw different conclusions from that catastrophe than their Cabalite cousins. Where the cabals seek power through military might and territorial control, the Haemonculi pursue mastery over the fundamental building blocks of existence itself. They see flesh as the ultimate medium for artistic expression, pain as the purest form of communication, and death as merely another variable to be controlled and manipulated. This philosophical divergence manifests in their organizational structure. Rather than forming cabals with their rigid hierarchies and territorial claims, Haemonculi gather into covens. These associations function more as professional guilds than military organizations, though the covens maintain considerable martial power through their rack servants and grotesque creations. Each coven develops its own specialties and techniques, closely guarded secrets passed between members and never shared with outsiders. The Prophets of Flesh, perhaps the most powerful coven, operate from the sprawling complex known as the Labyrinth of Tzeentch within Commorragh's depths, though they worship no chaos god. Instead, they have adopted the name as a mockery, demonstrating their mastery over change and transformation. Other covens focus on specific aspects of the flesh-crafting arts, the creation of combat drugs, the development of new warrior forms, or the preservation and restoration of ancient Eldari technologies through biological means. The economic model of the covens revolves around their services as mercenaries and craftsmen. A cabal planning a major raid might contract with a coven to provide enhanced warriors, grotesques whose massive forms can break through enemy lines, or specialized poisons tailored to the physiology of their intended victims. Archons seeking to cheat death pay exorbitant prices for the creation of their own crucibles, though the Haemonculi ensure these devices remain inferior to their own, requiring regular maintenance and updates that keep their clients dependent. Wealthy Drukhari commission body modifications, transforming themselves into more effective killers or simply pursuing aesthetic ideals that defy natural biology. The Haemonculi accept payment in various forms: slaves for experimentation, rare materials from real space, or favors to be called in at future dates. This last form of payment often proves most valuable, as a Haemonculus with debts owed by multiple archons can manipulate Commorragh's politics without ever directly entering the fray. The laboratories where Haemonculi conduct their work exist as pocket dimensions within the webway, accessible only through portals known to coven members. These spaces defy conventional geometry, their interiors far larger than their exteriors suggest. Rows of surgical tables stretch into darkness, each occupied by a subject in various states of transformation. Vat-grown organs pulse in nutrient solutions, awaiting transplantation into paying customers or incorporation into new creations. Banks of preserved bodies line the walls, specimens collected from across the galaxy representing thousands of species. The Haemonculi study these samples obsessively, seeking to understand the biological principles that might be adapted to Eldari physiology or incorporated into their warrior constructs. The air in these places hangs thick with chemical vapors and the copper tang of blood, while the constant background noise of screaming provides a perverse soundtrack to the Haemonculi's work. The internal hierarchy of a Haemonculi coven operates according to principles that predate the fall itself, structures refined over millennia of practice. At the apex stand the Haemonculus Ancients, beings so old that their memories stretch back to when the Eldari Empire ruled the stars without challenge. These creatures have practiced their craft for so long that they have transcended even the already horrific forms of their younger counterparts. A Haemonculus Ancient might measure their age in tens of thousands of years, their bodies transformed into configurations that defy easy description. Some have replaced so much of their original biology with crafted alternatives that determining where the Eldari ends and the construct begins becomes impossible. Others have grown to massive sizes through continuous augmentation, their laboratories modified to accommodate frames that tower over lesser beings. Below the ancients exist the master Haemonculi, practitioners who have achieved full membership within their coven and maintain their own laboratories. These individuals have proven their worth through centuries of experimentation and refinement of technique. Each master Haemonculus develops signature methods and specializations that distinguish them from their peers. One might focus on the manipulation of nervous systems, crafting pain engines of unprecedented sophistication. Another dedicates themselves to skeletal restructuring, creating warriors whose bones have been reinforced with metallic compounds and reshaped for optimal combat efficiency. The masters jealously guard their techniques, sharing knowledge only with chosen apprentices, and even then parceling out information slowly, ensuring their students remain dependent on their instruction for decades or longer. The apprentice system within the covens functions as both educational institution and proving ground. Young Drukhari who display aptitude for the flesh-crafting arts, or who simply possess the necessary ruthlessness and curiosity, may petition a master Haemonculus for instruction. The acceptance rate remains deliberately low. A master might take on a single apprentice per century, sometimes going far longer between students. The apprenticeship itself spans decades of grueling work, with the student performing the most tedious aspects of laboratory maintenance, while gradually being introduced to more complex procedures. An apprentice learns to prepare subjects for experimentation, maintain the various alchemical solutions and growth vats, and assist in surgeries that may last for weeks without pause. The master observes their students' work with critical attention, noting not just technical skill, but also creativity in problem-solving and willingness to push boundaries. Failure carries consequences more severe than mere dismissal. An apprentice who proves incompetent, who damages valuable specimens through carelessness, or who attempts to steal their master's techniques before completing their training faces transformation into a rack. This process strips away higher cognitive functions while enhancing physical capabilities and pain tolerance. The failed apprentice becomes a hulking servant, their body rebuilt into a more useful configuration. Additional limbs terminate in surgical implements, their torsos reinforced to carry heavy equipment, their nervous systems rewired to respond instantly to their master's commands. These racks retain enough awareness to understand what they have become, a deliberate cruelty that serves as warning to other apprentices. Some Haemonculi maintain entire retinues of failed students, each one a testament to the master's exacting standards. The majority of racks, however, originate not from failed apprentices, but from the endless stream of captives that flow through Commorragh. Victims selected for transformation undergo procedures that remake them into living tools. The Haemonculi remove portions of the brain responsible for independent thought and self-preservation instinct, leaving behind only the capacity to follow orders and experience sensation. The body receives extensive modification, muscle tissue enhanced through alchemical treatment, bones reinforced with metallic compounds, skin toughened to resist damage. Racks serve as laboratory assistants, bodyguards, and soldiers when covens involve themselves in Commorragh's conflicts. They feel pain with the same intensity as unmodified beings, perhaps more so given their enhanced nervous systems, but they lack the psychological framework to be debilitated by it. A rack will continue functioning even as its body suffers catastrophic damage, its rewired brain interpreting agony as mere sensory information rather than a signal to cease activity. Among the most prominent covens, the prophets of flesh command respect and fear throughout Commorragh. Their master, Urian Rakarth, stands as perhaps the most accomplished Haemonculus in the Dark City's history. His age remains uncertain even to other ancients, with some claiming he walked Commorragh's streets before the fall, while others suggest he may have existed for far longer. Rakarth's laboratories sprawl through a district of Commorragh known as the Fleshscape, where the very architecture consists of living tissue. Buildings breathe and pulse with organic rhythms, streets lined with what might be skin or muscle, or something combining characteristics of both. The prophets of flesh specialize in large-scale biological engineering, creating new species of warrior constructs and developing techniques for mass-producing enhanced soldiers. They're grotesques, massive warrior forms built from multiple subjects fused together and augmented with extensive modifications, set the standard by which all other covens measure their own creations. The Coven of 12 operates according to different principles than most of their peers. This organization limits its membership to exactly 12 master Haemonculi at any given time. When one member perishes beyond recovery or ascends to such heights of transformation that they withdraw from active participation, the remaining 11 select a replacement from among the most promising practitioners in Commorragh. The selection process involves competitions of skill, with candidates demonstrating their abilities through increasingly complex challenges. The Coven of 12 maintains laboratories in the sprawls, the industrial sectors of Commorragh, where much of the Dark City's manufacturing occurs. Their specialization focuses on the integration of biological and mechanical systems, creating hybrid technologies that blur the distinction between living flesh and crafted machine. Their work finds particular favor among Kabbalite warriors seeking combat enhancements that preserve their aesthetic sensibilities while providing tangible battlefield advantages. The Hex operates from the shadows even by Haemonculi standards. This coven maintains no fixed laboratory complex, instead utilizing mobile facilities that shift location constantly throughout Commorragh's lesser-known districts. The Hex specializes in toxins and chemical weapons, developing poisons tailored to specific targets with terrifying precision. Their masters have cataloged the biological weaknesses of thousands of species, maintaining vast libraries of genetic information harvested from specimens across the galaxy. A cabal planning an assassination might contract with the Hex to create a poison that will affect only the target, leaving everyone else in the vicinity unharmed. Alternatively, they might request a plague that will spread through an enemy population with specific characteristics, culling a rival's forces while leaving their own warriors untouched. The Hex's mobile laboratories allow them to avoid retaliation from clients who might object to the prices charged or the additional specimens collected during the course of their work. The political independence maintained by the covens represents a carefully cultivated status. Unlike the cabals, which exist in constant competition for territory and influence within Commorragh's hierarchies, the covens position themselves as service providers essential to all factions. An archon might war with rivals, but all archons require the services that Haemonculi provide. This creates a web of mutual dependence that protects the covens from direct assault. A cabal that moved against a coven would find itself cut off from crucial services. No resurrection crucibles, no enhanced warriors, no specialized poisons or combat drugs. Other cabals, seeing opportunity in their rival's weakness, would exploit the situation ruthlessly. The Haemonculi reinforce this protection through strategic distribution of their services, ensuring that no single faction gains enough of an advantage to risk upsetting the balance. The mercenary relationships between covens and other Drukhari factions operate according to complex protocols developed over millennia. A cabal seeking coven assistance typically approaches through intermediaries, negotiating terms that specify exactly what services will be provided and what payment is expected. These contracts are recorded in living documents, literally written into the flesh of specially prepared subjects who serve as walking agreements. The subject's skin displays the contract terms in raised scars or tattoos that shift and change if either party attempts to violate the agreement. Breaking a contract with a coven carries severe consequences. The offending party might find their crucible sabotaged, their enhanced warriors reverting to base forms at crucial moments, or their archon's body beginning to reject previous modifications in spectacularly painful fashion. Witch cults maintain their own relationships with the covens, though these tend toward the transactional rather than the ongoing arrangements typical of cabal contracts. A witch cult might commission combat drugs that enhance reflexes and pain tolerance for an upcoming performance in the arenas, or request modifications that will give their fighters advantages against specific opponents. The Haemonculi view the witches with a mixture of professional interest and mild contempt. The gladiators' focus on physical perfection and combat prowess represents a crude application of biological potential in the Haemonculi's estimation. Yet the witches' willingness to experiment with their own bodies and push physical limits provides useful data. Some Haemonculi maintain ongoing relationships with specific witch cults, using the arena performances as testing grounds for new enhancement techniques under combat conditions. The laboratorium complexes where covens conduct their primary work exist in spaces that defy conventional understanding of architecture and physics. A Haemonculus might maintain a laboratory that appears from the outside as a modest chamber tucked into a forgotten corner of Commorragh's infrastructure, yet stepping through the entrance reveals a vast facility stretching for kilometers in multiple directions. These pocket dimensions within the webway respond to their creator's will, expanding or contracting as needed, their internal geometry shifting to accommodate new equipment or experimental subjects. The walls of these spaces often incorporate living elements, tissue that responds to the Haemonculus's thoughts, growing new structures or reabsorbing old ones as requirements change. Within these laboratoriums, the true scope of Haemonculi experimentation becomes apparent. Rows of surgical tables extend into darkness, each hosting a subject in various stages of modification. Some victims remain conscious throughout their ordeals, their nervous systems stimulated to maintain awareness even as their bodies undergo radical transformation. Others exist in induced comas, their unconscious forms serving as raw material for constructs that require living components. Vat-grown organs pulse in nutrient baths, genetic templates waiting for activation and integration into new creations. The Haemonculi move through these spaces with practiced efficiency, their multiple limbs performing complex procedures simultaneously, their enhanced senses monitoring dozens of experiments at once. The extra-dimensional nature of these laboratories provides security advantages beyond mere concealment. A Haemonculus can seal the entrance to their workspace, severing the connection between their pocket dimension and Commorragh proper. Attackers attempting to breach such a laboratory would need to force their way through dimensional barriers, while the Haemonculus prepares defenses or activates escape routes leading to other locations within the webway. Some ancient Haemonculi have developed their laboratories to such an extent that the spaces have become semi-autonomous, capable of defending themselves through biological security systems that respond to intrusion with lethal force. These defenses might include airborne toxins tailored to affect anyone lacking specific genetic markers, automated surgical systems that attack unauthorized visitors, or simply the release of failed experiments kept in stasis for precisely such emergencies. The sub-districts within Commorragh, where Haemonculi maintain their most visible presence, reflect the nature of their work. The Fleshscape, home to the prophets of flesh, consists almost entirely of living architecture. Buildings grown from modified tissue pulse with regular rhythms, their surfaces warm to the touch and occasionally responsive to contact. Streets consist of toughened skin stretched over supporting structures of bone and cartilage. The district's inhabitants, mostly racks and lesser creations, move through this environment as blood cells through veins, each following programmed routes that serve the coven's larger purposes. Other covens maintain similar territories, each reflecting their particular specializations and aesthetic preferences. The Coven of 12's holdings in the sprawls incorporate more mechanical elements, their laboratories featuring extensive integration between biological and technological systems. The Hex's mobile facilities appear in different locations constantly, temporary installations that leave behind only organic residue when they relocate. The biomantic abilities that define the Haemonculi transcend mere surgery or genetic manipulation. These ancient beings have developed techniques that allow them to reshape living tissue as a sculptor works clay, bending flesh and bone to their will through methods that combine scientific understanding with something approaching sorcery. A Haemonculus can plunge their hands into a subject's body and restructure internal organs without breaking the skin, their fingers passing through flesh as if it were water, while simultaneously manipulating the tissue at a molecular level. This process requires no incisions, no conventional tools, just the application of will through hands that have been modified countless times to interface directly with living matter. The subject remains conscious throughout, experiencing every sensation as their body reorganizes itself according to the homunculus's design. The reconstruction of damaged or dead tissue represents one of the most fundamental applications of these powers. A homunculus can take a corpse hours or even days old and restore it to functional life, assuming the body retains enough intact material to work with. They rebuild destroyed organs from surviving cells, stimulate dead tissue back into activity through precisely applied bioelectric shocks, and reconnect severed neural pathways with microscopic precision. The restored subject may not retain all their original memories or personality traits, particularly if brain damage occurred before treatment, but they live and breathe and serve. This ability makes the homunculi invaluable to archons and other powerful drukhari who suffer injuries that would prove fatal to lesser beings. A warrior who takes a splinter rifle round through the heart can be restored within hours, their chest cavity opened, and the damaged organ either repaired or replaced with a vat-grown substitute. The creation of hybrid creatures demonstrates the homunculi's mastery over biological form at its most extreme. They combine genetic material from multiple species, fusing disparate physiologies into singular entities that should not exist according to natural law. A homunculus might graft the musculature of an orc onto an Eldari frame, reinforcing the elegant bone structure with the brutal strength of greenskin tissue. They incorporate the sensory organs of prey species into predator bodies, creating hunters with enhanced perception. The digestive systems of tyrannid organisms find their way into drukhari constructs, allowing these creations to extract nutrients from materials that would poison normal biology. These hybrids rarely survive long. The conflicting genetic codes war within their bodies, immune systems attacking foreign tissue even as the homunculus's modifications force integration. Most hybrids require constant maintenance, regular treatments to suppress rejection responses, and stabilize their warring physiologies. The grotesques represent the pinnacle of combat-focused flesh crafting. These massive warrior forms begin as multiple subjects, often 3 or 4 individuals selected for specific physical characteristics. The homunculus fuses these bodies together, creating a singular organism that combines the mass and strength of all its components. Additional modifications follow: reinforced skeletal structures capable of supporting the increased weight, enhanced musculature that responds to stimuli with explosive force, thickened skin layered with subdermal armor plating. The nervous systems of all original subjects merge into a simplified network that prioritizes combat responses over higher cognitive function. A grotesque feels pain, but processes it as combat data rather than a signal for retreat. Their minds retain fragments of their original personalities, enough awareness to understand what they have become, but insufficient cognitive capability to resist their programming. The modification of willing subjects follows different protocols than the creation of racks or grotesques. Wealthy drukhari commission enhancements that improve combat effectiveness while maintaining their aesthetic preferences and mental faculties. A Kabbalite warrior might request denser bone structure in their forearms to better deflect enemy blades, or additional fast twitch muscle fibers in their legs for improved speed. These modifications require careful calibration. Push the changes too far, and the subject's body begins to reject the alterations, or worse, their enhanced tissues develop incompatibilities with unmodified portions of their anatomy. The homunculi walk this line with practiced skill, knowing exactly how much modification a body can accept before systemic failure begins. Unwilling subjects receive no such consideration. The homunculi view captives as raw material to be exploited without restraint. They might graft additional limbs onto a victim's torso simply to observe how the nervous system adapts to controlling extra appendages. They replace major organs with alternatives harvested from different species, documenting the body's attempts to accommodate foreign biology. They restructure skeletal systems into configurations that cause constant agony, studying how prolonged pain affects brain chemistry and behavior. These experiments provide valuable data that informs more refined work on paying clients, each screaming subject contributing to the homunculi's expanding understanding of biological systems. The manipulation of pain represents perhaps the most refined aspect of Haemonculi abilities. They understand the mechanisms of suffering at a level that allows them to control every aspect of a subject's pain experience. A Haemonculus can remove pain entirely, severing the neural pathways that carry distress signals to the brain. Warriors modified in this fashion fight with terrifying efficiency, their bodies suffering catastrophic damage without triggering the psychological responses that normally accompany injury. Conversely, the Haemonculi can enhance pain responses to nightmarish degrees. They modify nerve clusters to fire continuously, creating sensations of agony without corresponding physical damage. They rewire pain receptors to respond to stimuli that normally produce pleasure, transforming every positive sensation into torment. The complete rewiring of nervous systems allows for even more sophisticated manipulations. A Haemonculus might restructure a subject's neural architecture so that pain triggers euphoric responses, creating beings who seek out injury and damage as sources of pleasure. They can partition nervous systems, creating subjects who experience normal sensation in some body parts, while others exist in states of constant agony or complete numbness. The most complex neural modifications involve the creation of redundant pain pathways, backup systems that activate if primary routes suffer damage. A subject modified in this fashion cannot escape suffering through nerve damage or psychological dissociation. Their body maintains multiple independent systems for experiencing pain, ensuring that agony continues regardless of what defenses the mind attempts to erect. The xenobiological knowledge accumulated by the Haemonculi spans millennia of study and experimentation. Their laboratories contain specimens from thousands of species encountered across the galaxy. Preserved orc physiology demonstrates the greenskin's remarkable regenerative capabilities and fungal-based biology. Tyrannid samples reveal the efficiency of the hive mind's biological engineering, organisms purpose-built for specific combat roles with no wasted genetic material. Human specimens provide insight into baseline human physiology and its countless variations across different worlds and environments. Tau bodies showcase the integration of technological and biological systems, their society's approach to enhancement through equipment rather than modification of the flesh itself. Even Astartes' gene seed has found its way into Haemonculi collections, though such samples remain rare and highly prized. The Haemonculi study these materials obsessively, seeking principles that might be adapted to their own work. The incorporation of alien physiology into Drukhari creations requires extensive understanding of how different biological systems function. A Haemonculus cannot simply graft orc tissue onto an Eldari frame and expect positive results. The genetic codes must be modified to prevent rejection, the metabolic requirements adjusted to function within the host body's existing systems, the cellular structures altered to respond to Eldari neural signals. This process demands countless failed experiments before successful integration occurs. The Haemonculi maintain detailed records of these attempts, documenting which combinations produce viable results and which lead to catastrophic failure. Over time, they have developed libraries of proven modification techniques, genetic templates that can be applied to new subjects with reasonable confidence of success. The near immortality achieved by established Haemonculi rests on multiple redundant systems, each designed to prevent true death. The crucible serves as the primary resurrection mechanism, a device that maintains genetic templates and consciousness imprints in crystalline matrices. When a Haemonculus dies, their consciousness transfers to the nearest crucible, which begins growing a new body using the stored genetic information. The process requires days or weeks, depending on the complexity of the body being grown and the sophistication of the crucible systems. A newly resurrected Haemonculus emerges weakened, their memories of recent events fragmented or unclear. The transfer process damages some neural pathways, creating gaps in recollection that may never fully restore. Despite these limitations, resurrection through crucible represents true continuity of consciousness, the same being returning to life rather than a copy or simulation. The phylactery functions as a backup system for consciousness storage, a secondary measure should the crucible fail or suffer destruction. These devices take countless forms according to their creators' preferences and paranoia. Some Haemonculi craft phylacteries from crystalline structures grown in their own laboratories, matrices that store consciousness as patterns of light frozen in solid form. Others prefer organic phylacteries, preserved organs suspended in alchemical solutions that maintain the tissue in perfect stasis while housing the consciousness within cellular memory. The most paranoid specimens create phylacteries from living subjects, implanting their consciousness backup within an unwitting host who continues their normal life unaware of the presence riding within their mind. The distribution of backup bodies and consciousness storage devices follows strategic principles developed through bitter experience. A Haemonculus might maintain their primary crucible within their laboratory, protected by all available defenses and security systems. Secondary crucibles hide in remote locations throughout Commorragh, tucked into forgotten chambers or disguised as mundane equipment. Tertiary backups extend beyond the Dark City entirely, hidden in unexplored regions of the webway where even other Haemonculi cannot easily locate them. This redundancy has allowed certain ancient practitioners to survive assassination attempts that destroyed their laboratories and killed their physical forms multiple times over. Each resurrection costs them something, fragments of memory or personality eroded by the transfer process, but they persist where others would have met final death. The maintenance requirements for these resurrection systems create dependencies that even the Haemonculi cannot entirely escape. Crucibles require regular calibration and updating to account for modifications made to the primary body. A Haemonculus who enhances their physical form must transfer the new genetic information to all their crucibles, ensuring that resurrected bodies incorporate recent improvements. Phylacteries need periodic refreshing, their stored consciousness patterns updated to include new memories and experiences. Neglecting these maintenance requirements risks resurrection into an outdated body lacking recent modifications, or worse, awakening with memories that end months or years before actual death. The Haemonculi schedule these updates with meticulous care, treating the maintenance of their immortality systems as seriously as any other aspect of their work. The practical immortality achieved through these methods has profound effects on Haemonculi psychology and behavior. They operate according to timescales that span millennia, pursuing projects that might require centuries to complete. Short-term setbacks hold little significance when measured against the vast stretches of time available to them. A failed experiment represents not disaster, but data, information that informs future attempts. Rivalries between Haemonculi play out over thousands of years, elaborate games of one-upmanship where each practitioner seeks to demonstrate superior skill through increasingly complex creations. The ancient Haemonculi remember the Eldari Empire before the fall, carrying within their modified minds direct experience of their race's greatest heights and most catastrophic failure. This perspective shapes their approach to their craft, driving them to pursue mastery over flesh and death itself as the only meaningful response to the horror that consumed their civilization. The weapons wielded by the Haemonculi reflect their fundamental philosophy that the infliction of suffering represents both art and science. Unlike the sleek splinter weapons favored by Kabbalite warriors or the gladiatorial implements of the witch cults, Haemonculi armaments focus on transformation and degradation of their targets. These devices do not simply kill. They unmake their victims at a cellular level, reducing living beings to component materials while ensuring maximum awareness of the process. The Haemonculi design their weapons with the same attention to detail they apply to their surgical work, each device a precision instrument calibrated to produce specific effects on biological systems. The flesh gauntlet stands as perhaps the most iconic Haemonculi weapon, a device that embodies their mastery over living tissue. This ornate glove extends from the wearer's hand and forearm, its surface covered in injection ports, molecular disruptor nodes, and neural interface connections that link directly to the Haemonculus's nervous system. When activated, the gauntlet channels the wearer's biomantic abilities through its mechanisms, amplifying their natural flesh-shaping powers to lethal degrees. A Haemonculus can thrust their gauntleted hand into an opponent's body and trigger catastrophic cellular breakdown. The victim's flesh begins to liquefy from the point of contact, muscles dissolving into protoplasmic slurry while bones soften and collapse. The process spreads rapidly through the body, following neural pathways and blood vessels to reach extremities within seconds. The victim remains conscious throughout, their brain the last organ to succumb as the homunculus savors the psychic emanations of their terror. The gauntlet's mechanisms allow for variable settings that produce different effects depending on the homunculus's intentions. A light touch might induce temporary paralysis, flooding the target's nervous system with tailored neurotoxins that freeze voluntary muscle control while leaving sensation intact. Moderate application causes localized tissue death, creating zones of necrosis that spread slowly enough for the victim to watch their own flesh blacken and slough away. Full activation triggers the complete cellular breakdown described above, reducing a living being to organic sludge in moments. Some homunculi modify their gauntlets with additional features: retractable surgical implements that emerge from the fingertips, injection systems loaded with experimental compounds, or sensory arrays that allow the wearer to feel their victim's pain as if it were their own. The scissor hand represents a more direct approach to dismemberment and modification. This weapon replaces the homunculus's entire hand and forearm with an array of surgical tools mounted on articulated mechanisms. Molecular edged blades extend and retract according to neural commands, their edges sharp enough to slice through ceramite armor as easily as flesh. Bone saws spin at speeds that generate minimal friction heat, allowing them to cut through skeletal material without cauterizing surrounding tissue. Injection needles deploy from hidden compartments, delivering toxins or mutagenic compounds directly into the target's bloodstream. The scissor hand's true sophistication lies in its neural interface, which provides the wielder with enhanced tactile feedback. A homunculus using a scissor hand can feel the texture of materials their blades cut through, sensing the difference between muscle and organ tissue, identifying bone density variations, and detecting the presence of foreign objects or modifications within a subject's body. Combat applications of the scissor hand extend beyond simple dismemberment. The weapon's surgical precision allows a homunculus to disable opponents through targeted strikes at nerve clusters and arterial junctions. A single slash might sever the tendons in an enemy's sword arm, rendering the limb useless without causing immediate death. Another cut could open the femoral artery, ensuring the target bleeds out slowly enough to remain conscious and suffering. The injection systems deliver compounds tailored to specific enemies. Against orcs, the scissor hand might inject agents that disrupt their fungal biology, preventing regeneration and causing existing tissue to necrotize. Against humans, tailored nerve agents induce paralysis or uncontrollable muscle spasms. Against other Eldari, the homunculi employ toxins that target their heightened nervous systems, amplifying pain responses to incapacitating levels. The various injection and toxin delivery systems employed by the homunculi demonstrate their extensive knowledge of biochemistry and physiology. These devices range from simple hypodermic needles mounted on gauntlets to sophisticated multi-chambered systems capable of delivering complex compound sequences. The toxins themselves represent years or centuries of refinement, each one designed to produce specific effects on particular physiologies. A homunculus might carry dozens of different compounds, each stored in crystalline vials that preserve their potency indefinitely. The selection of which toxin to employ depends on numerous factors: the target species, the desired effect, the tactical situation, and sometimes simply the homunculus's mood and aesthetic preferences. Neurotoxins feature prominently in the homunculi arsenal. These compounds target the nervous system directly, interfering with neural signal transmission or overstimulating nerve clusters. A fast-acting neurotoxin might induce instant paralysis, freezing the victim in place while leaving them fully aware of their surroundings. Slower-acting variants cause progressive loss of motor control, the victim's body betraying them gradually as the toxin spreads through their system. Some neurotoxins trigger uncontrollable muscle contractions, forcing the victim's body to tear itself apart through its own strength. Others induce sensory hallucinations, flooding the brain with false signals that make the victim perceive their flesh melting or insects burrowing through their organs. Mutagenic compounds represent a more exotic category of haemonculi toxins. These substances trigger rapid and uncontrolled cellular mutation in their victims. Flesh begins to grow in random directions, tumorous masses erupting from skin and internal organs. Bones soften and reshape themselves into configurations that cause constant agony. The victim's own immune system turns against them as their body recognizes the mutating tissue as foreign and attempts to destroy it, creating an internal war that accelerates tissue damage. The haemonculi particularly favor mutagenic toxins for use against heavily armored opponents. The compounds seep through environmental seals and air filtration systems, reaching the flesh beneath protective gear and transforming the victim within their own armor. The liquefier gun stands as one of the haemonculi's most horrifying ranged weapons. This device projects a stream of alchemical compounds that dissolve organic and inorganic matter with equal efficiency. The liquid clings to whatever it touches, spreading across surfaces and seeping into crevices. Flesh exposed to liquefier fluid begins to break down immediately, the molecular bonds holding cells together disrupting as the compound's active agents penetrate tissue. The victim watches their body dissolve, skin sloughing away to reveal muscle beneath, which in turn liquefies to expose bone. The process generates intense pain as nerve endings die, each one firing final distress signals before succumbing to the compound's effects. Armor provides limited protection. The liquefier fluid eats through most materials given sufficient exposure, though ceramite and other advanced compounds resist longer than standard metals or plastics. The hex rifle represents the haemonculi's approach to precision assassination and terror warfare. This weapon fires crystalline projectiles charged with exotic energies that induce molecular destabilization in their targets. A victim struck by a hex rifle round experiences their body's atomic structure beginning to break down. The effect starts at the impact site and spreads outward, tissue transforming into a crystalline substance that retains the appearance of flesh but possesses none of its properties. The crystallized tissue remains conscious and aware, nerve endings preserved in their transformed state. The victim can feel themselves hardening, their body becoming a statue of glittering crystal, while their mind screams within an immobile prison. The process continues until complete petrification occurs, at which point the victim exists as a conscious statue, aware but unable to move, speak, or interact with their surroundings in any way. The hex rifle's ammunition can be calibrated to produce variations on the basic petrification effect. Some settings cause the crystallization to spread more slowly, allowing the victim hours or days to contemplate their fate before the transformation completes. Others trigger rapid petrification that freezes the victim mid-action, their final expression of terror preserved for eternity. Particularly cruel haemonculi use settings that crystallize only portions of the body, leaving the victim partially mobile but increasingly burdened by the weight of their transformed tissue. The crystallized victims serve multiple purposes for the haemonculi. They function as trophies, decorative elements for laboratories and audience chambers. They provide subjects for study, their preserved tissues available for analysis without the complications of decay. Most significantly, they serve as warnings to others who might consider opposing the haemonculi's interests. The stinger pistol represents a more subtle weapon in the haemonculi arsenal, though no less lethal for its compact size. This sidearm fires crystal shards coated in toxins, each projectile designed to penetrate armor and deliver its payload directly into the target's bloodstream. The shards themselves are grown in specialized vats, their molecular structure engineered for optimal penetration characteristics. The toxins coating them vary according to the haemonculus's preferences and the intended target. A single stinger pistol might carry multiple types of ammunition, each loaded with different compounds. The weapon's compact size allows haemonculi to carry it concealed beneath their robes or integrated into their armor, providing a backup weapon when their more elaborate devices prove impractical. The defensive systems employed by the haemonculi reflect their understanding that their value to Commorragh's power structure provides only limited protection. Rivals within their own covens, ambitious archons seeking to eliminate creditors, or simply enemies accumulated over millennia of existence all represent potential threats. The Haemonculi address these dangers through layers of protection that combine biological modification, technological devices, and strategic positioning. Their armor, if it can be called such, consists of ornate surgical equipment integrated directly into their bodies. Articulated exoskeletons support their modified frames, providing structural reinforcement while housing various defensive systems. These frames incorporate force field generators that project energy barriers capable of deflecting or absorbing incoming attacks. The shadow field represents the most sophisticated personal defense available to the Haemonculi. This device generates a field of warped space-time around the wearer, causing incoming attacks to phase partially out of reality. Projectiles pass through the field's area of effect and emerge, having missed their target by centimeters or meters, their trajectories bent by the localized spatial distortion. Energy weapons dissipate as their coherent beams scatter across multiple dimensions. Melee attacks find their targets suddenly displaced from where they appeared to be, blades passing through empty air where a body should have stood. The shadow field's protection remains imperfect. Sustained attacks can overwhelm the field's generators, causing it to collapse and leaving the wearer vulnerable. The spatial distortions also affect the wearer's perception, making precise actions difficult while the field operates at full strength. Enhanced mobility systems allow the Haemonculi to disengage from unfavorable combat situations despite their often grotesque physical forms. Suspensor fields built into their armor reduce effective body weight, allowing them to move with surprising speed and agility. Some Haemonculi graft additional limbs onto their bodies specifically for locomotion, spider-like appendages that provide stability and rapid movement across difficult terrain. Others modify their leg structures extensively, replacing standard Eldari physiology with digitigrade configurations that provide enhanced jumping capability and running speed. The most extreme mobility modifications involve the complete replacement of legs with alternative propulsion systems, tentacles that propel the Haemonculus across surfaces through muscular contractions, or mechanical systems that hover above the ground using anti-gravitic technology. Access to the webway represents the Haemonculi's ultimate escape mechanism and strategic advantage. Their understanding of the ancient Eldari network exceeds that of most other Drukhari, accumulated through millennia of study and exploration. A Haemonculus under threat can activate personal webway portals, tearing open passages to other locations within Commorragh or to remote sections of the webway itself. These portals manifest with disturbing speed, reality splitting open to reveal the crystalline passages beyond. The Haemonculus steps through, and the portal collapses behind them, leaving pursuers with no means of following unless they possess similar capabilities. The portals also serve offensive purposes, allowing the Haemonculi to summon reinforcements from their laboratories. Racks and grotesques pour through the openings, emerging to defend their master or simply to cause chaos that covers the Haemonculus's withdrawal. The Animus Vitae represents one of the most sophisticated devices in the Haemonculi's arsenal, a crystalline mechanism that captures and stores the life essence of slain enemies. When activated near dying beings, the device draws in their departing consciousness and vital energies, trapping them within its matrix. The captured essence provides multiple benefits to the Haemonculus. It serves as sustenance, the stored suffering and terror feeding them as effectively as direct torture of living subjects. It functions as ammunition for certain weapons, the trapped consciousness released as directed psychic attacks that overwhelm enemy minds with the accumulated agony of all previous victims. It provides material for experiments, raw psychic energy that can be manipulated and shaped according to the Haemonculus's designs. The creation of an Animus Vitae requires extensive effort and rare materials. The crystalline matrix must be grown in specialized conditions, its molecular structure aligned to resonate with psychic energies. The containment mechanisms demand precise calibration to prevent the trapped essences from dissipating, or worse, achieving sufficient coherence to attempt escape. A poorly constructed Animus Vitae might shatter when first used, releasing all stored consciousness in an uncontrolled burst that can damage or destroy the wielder. Successfully crafted devices become treasured possessions, their capacity to store essence expanding with use as the crystal matrix adapts to contain increasing amounts of psychic energy. The Haemonculi employ their animus vitae strategically during raids and battles. Each enemy slain near the device contributes to its charge, the accumulated essence growing stronger with every death. A Haemonculus might deliberately position themselves near the heaviest fighting, allowing their rack servants and grotesque bodyguards to create a harvest of dying enemies while they gather the resulting essence. The charged animus vitae provides benefits beyond personal sustenance. Other Drukhari in proximity to an active device experience enhanced vigor, their own hunger for suffering temporarily sated by the overflow of captured anguish. This effect makes Haemonculi valuable assets in extended campaigns, their presence allowing raiding parties to operate longer before requiring return to Commorragh for feeding. The transformation of a living being into a rack begins with selection. The Haemonculi maintain exacting standards when choosing subjects for conversion, seeking specific physical and psychological characteristics that will produce optimal results. A captive displays unusual pain tolerance during initial torture sessions, their body enduring damage that would break others. Another possesses dense bone structure or naturally enhanced musculature that provides a superior foundation for augmentation. Some subjects attract attention through their resistance, their defiance marking them as possessing the psychological resilience necessary to survive the transformation process while retaining enough awareness to understand their new existence. The Haemonculi record these observations meticulously, cataloging potential rack candidates according to their projected utility once conversion completes. The physical process of rack creation spans weeks or months depending on the complexity of modifications planned and the subject's baseline physiology. The Haemonculus begins by mapping the victim's nervous system, identifying neural pathways and pain receptors throughout the body. This initial phase involves extensive vivisection, the subject's body opened in multiple locations to provide access to nerves and organs. The Haemonculus works with the victim conscious, their enhanced awareness allowing them to feel every probe and incision as the master craftsman catalogs their biological architecture. Once mapping completes, the actual restructuring begins. The Haemonculus removes portions of the brain responsible for higher cognitive functions, excising tissue that enables abstract thought, long-term planning, and complex emotional responses. What remains is a simplified neural architecture capable of following orders, processing sensory information, and executing physical tasks with mechanical precision. The body receives extensive modification to enhance its utility as a warrior servant. The Haemonculus injects mutagenic compounds into muscle tissue, triggering controlled growth that increases mass and strength. Bones undergo reinforcement through the introduction of metallic compounds, either grafted onto existing skeletal structures or woven into the bone matrix at a molecular level. The skin receives treatments that toughen it against damage, thickening the dermal layers and introducing subdermal armor plating in vital areas. Additional limbs may be grafted onto the torso, appendages harvested from other subjects or grown in vats specifically for this purpose. These extra arms terminate in various implements according to the rack's intended function: surgical tools for laboratory assistance, bladed weapons for combat units, or specialized equipment for maintenance and technical work. The nervous system undergoes perhaps the most significant alterations during rack creation. The Haemonculus rewires pain receptors to eliminate the psychological components of suffering while maintaining full sensory awareness. A rack feels pain with the same intensity as an unmodified being, perhaps more so given their enhanced nerve density, but their restructured brain processes these signals as mere data rather than distress requiring response. This modification produces warriors who continue functioning despite catastrophic injuries that would incapacitate normal soldiers. A rack can fight effectively with limbs severed, organs ruptured, or bones shattered, their simplified neural architecture treating damage as information to be noted rather than a crisis demanding immediate action. The Haemonculi deliberately preserve enough cognitive function for the rack to understand its condition, ensuring that the awareness of what they have become contributes to the psychic emanations of suffering that sustain their creators. Failed Haemonculi apprentices undergo a variant of the standard rack transformation process, one that carries additional layers of cruelty, reflecting their master's disappointment. These individuals possess the intelligence and ambition to seek training in the flesh-crafting arts, qualities that make their reduction to servitude particularly poignant. The Haemonculus removes their higher cognitive functions with surgical precision, excising exactly those portions of the brain that enabled the complex thought processes necessary for advanced fleshcraft. What remains is enough awareness to recognize their failure and comprehend their eternal servitude, but insufficient capability to ever again practice the arts they sought to master. These specialized racks often receive modifications that emphasize their new role as tools rather than practitioners. Their hands might be replaced entirely with surgical implements, permanent attachments that prevent them from ever again manipulating instruments with the delicacy required for flesh crafting. Their bodies become repositories for equipment, storage compartments carved into their torsos to hold their master's tools and materials. The role of racks within coven operations extends far beyond simple combat applications. In the laboratories, they serve as tireless assistants, their enhanced strength allowing them to move heavy equipment or restrain struggling subjects, while their rewired pain responses enable them to work in environments that would prove lethal to unmodified beings. A rack can reach into vats of caustic chemicals to retrieve specimens without hesitation, their flesh blistering and sloughing away as they complete their assigned task. They maintain the complex life support systems that keep experimental subjects alive during extended procedures, monitoring vital signs and adjusting equipment according to pre-programmed parameters. Their simplified neural architecture makes them ideal for repetitive tasks requiring precision but not creativity. They can perform the same surgical procedure thousands of times without variation, their movements following patterns burned into their modified brains through conditioning and neural programming. In combat situations, racks function as shock troops and bodyguards for their Haemonculi masters. They advance without hesitation into enemy fire, their pain immunity and enhanced durability allowing them to absorb damage that would stop conventional infantry. Their weapons vary according to their specific modifications and their master's preferences. Some carry blades integrated directly into their arms, molecular edged weapons that extend from housings built into their forearms. Others wield specialized tools adapted for combat use, surgical saws that can cut through armor, injection systems loaded with fast-acting toxins, or flesh gauntlets similar to those employed by the Haemonculi themselves, though less sophisticated. The most heavily modified racks mount ranged weapons directly onto their bodies, ossifactors or liquefier guns integrated into their skeletal structure and connected to their nervous systems for intuitive aiming. The creation of grotesques represents the Haemonculi's flesh crafting abilities pushed to their ultimate expression in the realm of combat constructs. These massive warrior forms begin not with a single subject, but with multiple bodies selected for specific characteristics. The Haemonculus might choose 3 or 4 individuals, each contributing particular traits to the final creation. One subject provides the dense musculature of a warrior who spent their life in heavy combat. Another contributes the enhanced cardiovascular system of an athlete or gladiator. A third offers the pain-resistant nervous system of a masochist who sought out suffering as entertainment. The fourth might simply possess the ideal skeletal structure, bones thick and strong enough to support the mass that will result from combining all these elements. The fusion process requires extraordinary skill, even by Haemonculi standards. The subjects must be kept alive throughout the procedure, their bodies maintained in states of consciousness that allow their tissues to integrate properly. The Haemonculus begins by opening all subjects simultaneously, exposing their internal structures for manipulation. They identify connection points where bodies can be joined, locations where blood vessels align and nerve clusters can be merged. The actual fusion involves the manipulation of flesh at a cellular level, encouraging tissues from different bodies to recognize each other as part of a single organism. The Haemonculus applies mutagenic compounds that suppress immune responses, and promote cellular integration, forcing disparate genetic codes to coexist within a unified biological system. The skeletal structure receives extensive reinforcement during grotesque construction. The Haemonculi selects the strongest bones from all available subjects, grafting them together into a composite skeleton capable of supporting the massive frame. Additional reinforcement comes from metallic compounds introduced directly into the bone matrix, creating a hybrid structure that combines biological and synthetic materials. The spine requires particular attention, as it must support not only the grotesque's considerable weight, but also the neural connections that will control the merged body. The Haemonculi often extends the spinal column, adding vertebrae to create a longer torso that can accommodate the organs from multiple subjects. Ribs are reinforced and expanded, creating a barrel chest that houses multiple hearts and lung sets working in parallel. The musculature of a grotesque represents layers upon layers of enhanced tissue, muscle groups from different subjects woven together and augmented through chemical treatment. The Haemonculi arranges these muscles in configurations that maximize strength output, sometimes departing from natural anatomical arrangements in favor of mechanical efficiency. A grotesque's arms might contain 3 or 4 complete sets of biceps and triceps, the muscle fibers braided together to generate crushing force. The legs receive similar treatment, massive pillars of enhanced muscle capable of supporting and propelling the construct's bulk. The Haemonculi injects these muscle masses with stimulant compounds that keep them in a state of constant partial contraction, maintaining readiness for explosive movement at the cost of tremendous caloric requirements. The nervous system of a grotesque combines elements from all contributing subjects, merged into a simplified network that prioritizes combat responses. The Haemonculi removes most higher cognitive functions, leaving only the capacity to follow orders and execute combat maneuvers. Multiple brains may be incorporated into the construct, their neural tissues merged or left separate depending on the desired result. Some grotesques retain fragments of their original personalities, multiple consciousness shards trapped within the same body and aware of their shared imprisonment. Others receive complete neural integration, all original minds subsumed into a singular simplified awareness that knows only violence and obedience. The pain receptors throughout the grotesque's body remain fully functional, ensuring that damage generates the psychic emanations of suffering that feed the Haemonculi, but the neural architecture processes this pain as combat data rather than a signal for retreat or self-preservation. Additional augmentations transform grotesques into living weapons platforms. The Haemonculi graft stimulant engines directly onto the construct's spine mechanical devices that pump combat drugs and enhancement compounds directly into the bloodstream. These engines respond to neural signals or pre-programmed triggers, flooding the grotesque system with chemicals that further enhance strength, speed, and aggression. The drugs also suppress any remaining survival instinct, ensuring the grotesque continues fighting until its body suffers damage too extensive for even its enhanced physiology to overcome. Some grotesques receive integrated weapon systems, ranged weapons built into their arms or torsos, and connected to their nervous systems for intuitive operation. Others carry massive melee weapons, chain blades or power mauls sized appropriately for their enhanced frames. The variety of specialized grotesque variants reflects the diverse requirements of coven operations and client contracts. Siege-breaking grotesques receive maximum armor reinforcement, their skin thickened to the point of becoming chitinous plating, subdermal armor layered so extensively that their bodies can withstand heavy weapons fire. These constructs serve as living battering rams, advancing into fortified positions while absorbing fire that would destroy lighter forces. Their arms terminate in massive fists reinforced with metallic compounds, capable of punching through armored doors or crushing enemy vehicles. Some carry integrated demolition charges, explosive devices built into their torsos that can be detonated remotely, transforming the grotesque into a massive bomb that eliminates both itself and everything in proximity. Infiltration variants represent the opposite extreme of grotesque design philosophy. These constructs receive modifications focused on stealth and assassination rather than raw combat power. The Haemonculi might use only 2 subjects for fusion rather than the standard 3 or 4, creating a smaller frame that can navigate confined spaces. The musculature receives different treatment, enhanced for speed and precision rather than crushing strength. The nervous system retains more cognitive capability, allowing the infiltration grotesque to follow complex orders and adapt to changing situations. Some receive chameleon skin grafts, tissue harvested from species capable of altering their appearance, allowing the grotesque to blend with its surroundings. Others undergo extensive facial reconstruction, their features reshaped to appear more normal when viewed from a distance, the monstrous nature of their form only becoming apparent upon close inspection. Aquatic grotesques demonstrate the Haemonculi's ability to adapt their creations to specialized environments. These constructs incorporate genetic material from amphibious or fully aquatic species, their respiratory systems modified to extract oxygen from water as efficiently as from air. Webbing grows between their fingers and toes, providing propulsion through liquid environments. Their skin receives treatments that allow it to withstand pressure variations and resist the corrosive effects of various liquid compositions. Some aquatic grotesques serve as assault troops for raids on waterborne targets, emerging from seas or rivers to attack coastal settlements. Others function as guardians for Haemonculi laboratories located in the flooded sections of Commorragh's Undercity, their enhanced swimming capability making them far more effective in their native environment than conventional warriors. Berserker grotesques receive neural modifications that remove all inhibitions and self-preservation instincts, creating constructs driven purely by aggression and the desire to inflict violence. The Haemonculi damages specific brain regions responsible for fear responses and rational thought, leaving only the most primitive combat instincts. Stimulant engines on these variants operate continuously rather than in response to triggers, flooding the grotesque system with rage-inducing compounds that keep it in a state of constant fury. These constructs require restraints when not in combat, their uncontrolled aggression making them dangerous to everyone in proximity, including their creators. During battle, handlers release the berserker grotesques and direct them toward enemy forces, the constructs charging forward with no regard for tactics or self-preservation, simply seeking to destroy everything they encounter. The maintenance requirements for grotesques exceed those of standard racks significantly. The fusion of multiple bodies creates physiological stresses that require constant monitoring and adjustment. The Haemonculi must regularly treat their grotesques with compounds that suppress rejection responses, preventing the disparate genetic codes from triggering immune reactions that would tear the construct apart from within. The stimulant engines require refilling with fresh drug supplies, their reservoirs depleting rapidly during extended operations. Damaged tissue needs repair or replacement, wounds that would heal naturally in unmodified beings, instead festering in grotesques due to the complexity of their hybrid physiology. A grotesque that sees heavy combat might require complete reconstruction every few months, the Haemonculi essentially rebuilding the construct from whatever salvageable material remains after battle. The psychological impact of grotesque transformation on the original subjects varies depending on how much awareness the Haemonculi preserves during the fusion process. Some grotesques retain fragmented memories of their previous existence, consciousness shards that surface occasionally to experience horror at what they have become. These moments of awareness provide particularly rich suffering for the Haemonculi to harvest, the grotesque's mind briefly achieving enough coherence to understand its condition before subsiding back into the simplified combat-focused consciousness that dominates most of the time. Other grotesques experience their transformation as a complete break from their previous existence, their merged consciousness forming something entirely new that possesses no direct connection to the original subjects. These constructs function more efficiently as weapons, their lack of internal conflict allowing them to focus entirely on combat without the distraction of resurfacing memories or competing personality fragments. The deployment of racks and grotesques in coven operations follows tactical doctrines developed over millennia of warfare. Racks form the basic infantry, advancing in disciplined formations that contrast sharply with the individualistic combat styles favored by Kabbalite warriors. Their pain immunity allows them to maintain formation cohesion under fire that would break conventional units, the racks continuing their advance even as their ranks suffer casualties. Grotesques serve as breakthrough elements, their massive frames and enhanced strength allowing them to punch through enemy lines or eliminate hardened targets. The Haemonculi position themselves behind these forces, protected by their creations, while they employ their various weapons and abilities to support the assault or harvest suffering from dying enemies. The war machines crafted by the Haemonculi represent a fusion of their flesh-crafting expertise with the darker aspects of Drukhari engineering philosophy. These constructs blur the boundary between vehicle and living organism, incorporating biological components into mechanical frameworks or grafting technological systems directly onto modified flesh. Unlike the sleek anti-gravitic vehicles favored by Kabbalite warriors, Haemonculi war machines exist to project suffering across the battlefield, their very presence generating the psychic emanations of agony that sustain their creators. Each engine serves dual purposes, as a weapons platform capable of engaging enemy forces and as a mobile torture device that harvests pain from both victims and operators. The Talos pain engine stands as the most recognizable of these constructs, a towering machine that combines the mobility of a combat walker with the functionality of a surgical theater. The basic chassis consists of a reinforced framework standing roughly twice the height of an Eldari warrior, supported on multiple articulated legs that provide stability across varied terrain. These legs terminate in spiked feet that dig into surfaces for purchase, their hydraulic systems powerful enough to propel the entire construct forward in sudden bursts of speed despite its considerable mass. The upper structure houses the pilot configuration, though calling the occupant a pilot understates the horror of their situation. The Haemonculi select subjects for Talos integration based on specific criteria, individuals who displayed particular sensitivity to pain during initial torture sessions, whose nervous systems proved exceptionally responsive to stimulation, or who simply possessed the physical resilience to survive the integration process. The integration procedure begins with the subject's placement into an amniotic tank positioned at the Talos' core. This sealed chamber contains alchemical fluids that sustain the pilot's body while simultaneously heightening their sensory awareness. The Haemonculus opens the subject's torso and skull, exposing neural tissue and major organs for connection to the Talos' control systems. Cables and tubes penetrate the pilot's body at dozens of points, neural interfaces threading directly into their brain and spinal column. These connections create a direct link between the pilot's nervous system and the pain engine's sensors and weapons, allowing them to control the machine through thought alone. The pilot experiences sensory input from the Talos' various detection systems as if they were extensions of their own body, feeling the vibrations of the machine's footsteps, sensing the heat signatures of nearby enemies, and perceiving the battlefield through multiple visual spectrums simultaneously. The cruelty of this arrangement extends beyond simple physical integration. The pilot remains fully conscious throughout their service within the Talos, their enhanced awareness ensuring they experience every moment of their imprisonment with complete clarity. The amniotic fluids prevent their body from atrophying, but do nothing to dull sensation. Instead, the chemical compounds heighten nerve sensitivity, ensuring that every stimulus registers with enhanced intensity. The pilot feels the Talos' damage as wounds to their own flesh, enemy fire striking the machine's armor, translating into pain signals that flood their nervous system. They experience the suffering of the Talos' victims through the machine's sensory arrays, their consciousness forced to process the agony inflicted by the weapons they control. This arrangement generates continuous psychic emanations of anguish that radiate from the pain engine, providing sustenance to nearby Haemonculi and other Drukhari, while simultaneously demoralizing enemies who sense the depth of suffering contained within the machine. The weapons mounted on a Talos pain engine reflect the Haemonculi's preference for inflicting maximum suffering while maintaining tactical effectiveness. Twin splinter cannons represent the most common primary armament, these weapons firing storms of crystalline shards coated in toxins. The shards penetrate armor through kinetic force alone, their molecular edge tips capable of punching through ceramite and plasteel. Once embedded in flesh, the toxins activate, spreading through the victim's bloodstream to trigger cascading organ failure or neural disruption. The splinter cannons mount on articulated arms that respond to the pilot's mental commands, tracking targets with precision that reflects the direct neural connection between weapon and operator. Some Talos variants replace the splinter cannons with haywire blasters, weapons that project electromagnetic pulses designed to disable enemy vehicles and power armor. These blasters prove particularly effective against heavily mechanized forces, their energy discharges frying circuits and overloading power systems. Close combat capabilities come from the Talos' macro scalpel and chain flails, oversized versions of surgical implements adapted for battlefield use. The macro scalpel consists of a massive blade mounted on a powered arm, its edge maintaining molecular sharpness through the same technology employed in smaller surgical tools. The blade can slice through tank armor as easily as flesh, its cutting edge generating minimal resistance as it passes through materials. The Haemonculi program's specific strike patterns into the Talos' combat routines, teaching the machine to target structural weak points in enemy vehicles or to perform precise dismemberment of infantry targets. The chain flails represent a more brutal approach, weighted chains studded with hooks and blades that the Talos whips through enemy formations. These weapons prove devastatingly effective against clustered infantry, the chains wrapping around multiple targets simultaneously and the hooks tearing through flesh and armor alike. The Talos' sensor suite incorporates technologies that allow it to detect and track targets through various means. Standard visual sensors provide baseline awareness, their multiple lenses offering panoramic views of the battlefield. Thermal imaging identifies heat signatures, revealing enemies attempting to hide behind cover or in darkness. Motion detectors register movement patterns, allowing the Talos to track fast-moving targets or detect ambushes before they spring. The most sophisticated sensors detect psychic emanations, reading the emotional states of nearby beings and identifying concentrations of fear or pain that might indicate wounded enemies or civilian populations. This last capability serves the Haemonculi's purposes particularly well, allowing their pain engines to locate and prioritize targets that will generate the most suffering when engaged. The Talos' armor plating consists of composite materials that combine metallic alloys with hardened organic compounds, creating protection that repairs itself over time through biological processes while maintaining the strength of conventional armor. Damage to the plating triggers regenerative responses, specialized cells within the organic components multiplying to fill gaps and restore integrity. This self-repair occurs slowly, requiring hours or days to heal significant damage, but it reduces the maintenance burden on the Haemonculi and allows Talos engines to remain operational during extended campaigns. The armor's organic components also incorporate pain receptors that connect to the pilot's nervous system, ensuring that damage to the machine translates into suffering for the operator, and thus generates the psychic emanations that make the Talos valuable beyond its combat capabilities. Deployment patterns for Talos pain engines emphasize their role as heavy support units and terror weapons. The Haemonculi position them at key points in their battle lines, using their firepower to suppress enemy positions, while their mere presence demoralizes opposing forces. The psychic aura of suffering radiating from each Talos affects enemy morale, sensitive individuals experiencing waves of sympathetic pain or sensing the torment of the pilot trapped within. Against forces with psychic members, this effect intensifies, the trapped pilot's anguish resonating through the warp and potentially disrupting enemy psychers' concentration. Multiple Talos engines operating in proximity create overlapping fields of psychic distress that can break enemy formations even before direct combat begins. The Chronos Parasite Engine represents a more specialized development in Haemonculi war machine design, a construct focused primarily on harvesting and redistributing the psychic energy generated by suffering. Where the Talos functions as a combat platform that incidentally produces pain, the Chronos exists specifically to collect anguish from the battlefield and convert it into sustenance for nearby Drukhari. The basic structure resembles the Talos in its general configuration, a machine body supported on multiple articulated legs with a central chassis housing the primary systems. The Chronos lacks the Talos' heavy weapons loadout, mounting instead the Spirit Vortex and Spirit Siphon, devices designed to manipulate psychic energies rather than inflict physical damage. The Spirit Vortex manifests as a swirling field of psychic energy that surrounds the Chronos, visible to those with which sight is a maelstrom of captured souls and pain echoes. This vortex draws in the departing life essence of dying beings within its area of effect, preventing their souls from escaping to whatever afterlife their species might claim. The captured essence circulates within the vortex, processed by the Chronos' arcane mechanisms into a form that Drukhari physiology can absorb. The machine then radiates this refined sustenance outward, nearby Drukhari experiencing a rush of vigor as their eternal hunger receives temporary satisfaction. Warriors fighting near an active Chronos find their strength enhanced, wounds healing with unnatural speed, and their need to return to Commorragh for feeding delayed or eliminated entirely. The Spirit Siphon operates on similar principles, but with more directed application. This device projects a beam of psychic energy that locks onto individual targets, drawing their life essence directly from their bodies even while they still live. Victims caught in the Spirit Siphon's beam experience their vitality draining away, their bodies weakening as the Chronos harvests their spiritual energy. The process proves intensely painful, the victim feeling their very soul being pulled from their flesh while their body remains animate. Those who survive the experience often suffer permanent damage, their connection to the warp weakened, or their life force diminished in ways that leave them hollow shells of their former selves. The Chronos channels this harvested energy through the same distribution system that processes the Spirit Vortex's collection, feeding nearby Drukhari with the stolen essence of their enemies. The pilot configuration within a Chronos differs from that of the Talos, reflecting the machine's different operational requirements. Where a Talos pilot must maintain combat awareness and control weapon systems, a Chronos operator serves primarily as a psychic conduit and targeting intelligence. The Haemonculi select individuals with latent psychic sensitivity for Chronos integration, beings whose souls burn brightly enough to attract she who thirsts attention, but who lack the discipline or training to control their abilities. The integration process involves similar physical connections to those employed in Talos construction, neural interfaces, and life support systems that sustain the pilot while binding them to the machine. Additional modifications target the pilot's psychic capabilities, enhancing their sensitivity to warp energies while simultaneously preventing them from exercising conscious control over their abilities. The Chronos pilot experiences the battlefield as a landscape of souls and suffering, their enhanced psychic senses perceiving the spiritual dimensions underlying physical reality. They see the life essence of nearby beings as flames of varying intensity, identifying targets rich in psychic energy that will provide maximum sustenance when harvested. They feel the flow of captured souls through the Spirit Vortex, experiencing fragments of their victims' final moments and emotions. This constant exposure to death and suffering drives many Chronos pilots to madness, their consciousness fragmenting under the weight of thousands of deaths experienced through psychic connection. The Haemonculi view this deterioration as acceptable, even desirable, as the pilot's descent into insanity generates additional suffering that feeds the machine's collection systems. The deployment of Chronos engines follows different tactical principles than Talos usage. Rather than positioning them as heavy weapons platforms, the Haemonculi place Chronos engines within their formations, where they can maximize the distribution of harvested essence to surrounding warriors. A typical deployment might position a Chronos at the center of a rack formation, the engine's Spirit Vortex collecting the souls of enemies killed by the racks while simultaneously sustaining the warriors, and accelerating their regeneration. This arrangement creates a self-reinforcing cycle. The racks fight more effectively due to the Chronos' sustenance, killing more enemies and generating more essence for the machine to harvest and redistribute. In extended engagements, a properly positioned Chronos can keep an entire coven force operating at peak efficiency for hours or days, eliminating the need for warriors to withdraw and feed. The interaction between Chronos engines and other Drukhari forces extends beyond simple sustenance provision. The machines serve as mobile feeding stations during raids, allowing raiding parties to sustain themselves without transporting captives back to Commorragh. This capability proves particularly valuable during deep strike operations or extended campaigns where maintaining supply lines becomes problematic. The Chronos harvests essence from the local population, processing the psychic energy of dying defenders into sustenance that keeps the raiders operating at full capacity. Some Archons contract with covens specifically for Chronos support during major operations, the machine's presence allowing their forces to range farther from Commorragh and sustain longer engagements than would otherwise prove possible. The creation and deployment of Clawed Fiends represents a different approach to Haemonculi war beast design, focusing on genetic engineering rather than the fusion techniques employed in grotesque construction. These creatures begin as baseline specimens, animals or humanoids selected for their aggressive temperaments and physical capabilities. The Haemonculi subject these specimens to extensive genetic modification, introducing DNA sequences from multiple predator species to create hybrids that combine the most lethal characteristics of their component organisms. A Clawed Fiend might incorporate the musculature of a great cat, providing explosive strength and speed, combined with the sensory capabilities of a tracking hound and the regenerative abilities of certain reptilian species. The physical form of a mature Clawed Fiend reflects its engineered nature, a quadrupedal predator standing as tall as an Eldari warrior at the shoulder. The body displays obvious signs of genetic manipulation, muscle groups that bulge with unnatural mass, claws that extend far beyond what natural evolution would produce, and sensory organs positioned in configurations that maximize hunting efficiency. The head features a broad skull housing powerful jaws capable of crushing ceramite, multiple rows of teeth designed for tearing through armor and flesh alike. The eyes reflect enhanced visual processing, their pupils capable of adjusting to various light levels, and their neural connections providing processing speed that allows the fiend to track fast-moving targets with precision. The Haemonculi engineer Clawed Fiends with specific behavioral modifications that make them controllable despite their aggressive nature. Neural implants respond to command signals from handlers, overriding the creature's natural instincts when necessary to direct its attacks towards specific targets or recall it from pursuit. These implants prove imperfect, particularly when the fiend enters combat frenzy, but they provide sufficient control for tactical deployment. The creatures receive conditioning during their growth period, exposure to various stimuli that teach them to recognize Drukhari as handlers rather than prey. This conditioning never completely eliminates the fiend's predatory instincts toward its creators, requiring handlers to maintain constant vigilance and readiness to activate control implants should the creature's aggression redirect toward friendly forces. Combat deployment of Clawed Fiends emphasizes their role as fast attack units and hunter-killers. The Haemonculi release them ahead of main battle lines, the creatures racing forward to engage enemy forces before heavier units arrive. Their enhanced speed allows them to close distances rapidly, crossing open ground that would expose conventional infantry to devastating fire. The fiend's claws and teeth prove capable of tearing through most armor types, their attacks targeting joints and weak points with instinctive precision. Against infantry formations, a single Clawed Fiend can cause catastrophic disruption, the creature's presence forcing enemies to redirect fire toward the immediate threat while Drukhari forces advance under reduced pressure. The use of Clawed Fiends in gladiatorial combat provides both entertainment and practical testing of the creature's capabilities. The arenas of Commorragh regularly feature matches between Clawed Fiends and various opponents, from captured enemies to other engineered war beasts. These contests allow the Haemonculi to observe their creations under controlled conditions, noting performance characteristics and identifying areas for improvement in future specimens. Successful arena fighters become breeding stock, their genetic material harvested for incorporation into subsequent generations of fiends. The most accomplished specimens might serve in this capacity for decades, their genes propagating through hundreds of offspring, while they continue to fight in increasingly elaborate arena spectacles. The breeding programs maintained by the Haemonculi for clawed fiend production operate on principles that combine selective breeding with ongoing genetic manipulation. Each generation receives modifications intended to enhance specific characteristics, increased aggression, improved sensory capabilities, or enhanced regeneration. The Haemonculi maintain detailed genetic records tracking bloodlines across multiple generations, identifying which combinations produce optimal results. Failed specimens, those that display insufficient aggression or poor physical development, face either termination or conversion into other purposes. Some become components for grotesque construction, their enhanced musculature and predatory organs grafted onto humanoid frames. Others serve as test subjects for experimental procedures, their modified genetics providing data on how various treatments affect engineered organisms. Lesser-known constructs emerging from Haemonculi laboratories demonstrate the breadth of their experimental work and willingness to pursue concepts that may never achieve widespread deployment. Experimental war machines occupy workshops throughout Commorragh, prototypes that combine various technologies and biological systems in novel configurations. Some projects focus on mobility, attempting to create constructs that can navigate environments where conventional vehicles fail. These might include machines that burrow through solid rock using acid secretions and mechanical drills, or constructs capable of phase shifting through solid barriers by manipulating localized dimensional instabilities. Other experiments pursue enhanced offensive capabilities, mounting weapons systems that push the boundaries of what Drukhari technology can achieve, or incorporating biological weapons that generate novel toxins or pathogens. Floating surgical platforms represent one category of successful experimental construct that has achieved limited deployment. These devices consist of anti-gravitic platforms mounting complete surgical theaters, allowing Haemonculi to perform procedures in field conditions or during active combat operations. The platforms hover at variable heights, their stabilization systems maintaining level surfaces even while moving across rough terrain or under fire. Robotic arms extend from the platform's edges, mounting the full array of surgical implements that a haemonculus might require. Life support systems keep subjects alive during procedures, while containment fields prevent blood and other fluids from spilling over the platform's edges. The Haemonculi employ these platforms during raids, performing modifications on captured subjects immediately rather than waiting for transport back to their laboratories. This immediate processing allows them to convert captives into racks or extract useful organs while the tissue remains fresh, improving success rates and reducing waste. The various prototype engines that never achieved widespread deployment litter Haemonculi workshops, failed experiments that revealed fundamental flaws in their design or operation. Some prototypes proved too unstable, their biological components rejecting mechanical integration or their power systems generating insufficient energy to sustain operation. Others succeeded technically but failed practical evaluation, their capabilities insufficient to justify the resources required for construction or their maintenance demands exceeding what even the Haemonculi considered reasonable. A few prototypes demonstrated excessive unpredictability, their behavior patterns too erratic for reliable tactical deployment despite impressive capabilities when functioning correctly. One notable failed design attempted to create a psychic amplification engine, a construct that would enhance the psychic abilities of nearby Haemonculi and allow them to perform flesh crafting at range during combat. The prototype incorporated multiple psyker sensitives as organic components, their consciousness merged into a collective that would channel and focus psychic energies. Initial testing showed promise, the engine successfully amplifying its operators' biomantic abilities and extending their effective range significantly. However, the merged consciousness proved unstable, the component psychers' minds achieving a degree of coherence that allowed them to resist their programming. The resulting psychic backlash destroyed the prototype and killed the homunculus conducting the test. Subsequent attempts to recreate the design incorporated more extensive neural limitations on the psyker components, but these modifications reduced the amplification effect below useful thresholds. The project remains abandoned, though some homunculi continue research into psychic amplification through alternative approaches. Another abandoned prototype focused on mass conversion of captives into racks, a mobile processing facility that could transform dozens of subjects simultaneously. The design incorporated multiple surgical theaters arranged around a central control station, with the homunculus directing the conversion procedures through automated systems. The prototype successfully processed subjects in batches, significantly reducing the time required compared to individual conversion. However, the automated systems lacked the precision of direct homunculi manipulation, producing racks of inferior quality with higher failure rates. The prototype also proved vulnerable to disruption, its centralized control systems creating a single point of failure that could disable the entire facility. The homunculi concluded that the reduced processing time did not justify the compromises in quality and reliability, abandoning the design in favor of traditional individual conversion methods. Among the countless horrors that inhabit Commorragh, few beings command the respect and fear that Urian Rakarth inspires through his mere existence. The Master of the Prophets of Flesh stands as perhaps the most accomplished flesh crafter in the Dark City's history, his age and achievements placing him in a category that transcends the already horrific standards of his kind. Rakarth claims to have walked the streets of Commorragh before the fall, to have witnessed the birth scream of Slaanesh that consumed the Eldari Empire and transformed the core worlds into the Eye of Terror. Whether this claim holds truth remains uncertain even to other homunculus ancients, as the fall occurred over 10,000 years ago by the imperial calendar, and memories that old become suspect even for beings who possess the homunculi's methods of preserving consciousness. What remains undisputed is that Rakarth has practiced his craft for longer than most civilizations have existed, accumulating knowledge and technique that makes him the undisputed master of biological manipulation within Commorragh. The physical form that Rakarth inhabits reflects millennia of self-modification and experimentation. He has transformed his body so extensively that determining what remains of his original Eldari physiology becomes impossible. His frame towers over standard Eldari, elongated through extensive skeletal restructuring that added vertebrae to his spine and lengthened his limbs to proportions that suggest a spider's legs more than humanoid anatomy. Additional arms extend from his torso, some terminating in hands that retain their original configuration, while others have been replaced with specialized surgical implements that emerge directly from modified bone and muscle. His skin displays the pallor of corpse flesh, stretched tight over a frame that combines organic and synthetic materials in configurations that defy easy categorization. The face, when visible beneath the elaborate breathing apparatus and sensor arrays he wears, shows features that have been smoothed and reshaped countless times, the nose reduced to slits, the eyes replaced with multi-lensed optical systems that perceive across multiple spectrums simultaneously. Rakarth's laboratories occupy a vast district within Commorragh known as the Fleshscape, a region where the architecture itself consists of living tissue grown and shaped according to his designs. Buildings pulse with organic rhythms, their walls warm to the touch and responsive to contact. Streets consist of toughened skin stretched over supporting structures of bone and cartilage, the entire district functioning as a single massive organism under Rakarth's control. The laboratories themselves extend through multiple dimensions, pocket spaces within the webway that connect to the Fleshscape through portals scattered throughout the district. The true scope of these facilities remains unknown even to other members of the Prophets of Flesh, as Rakarth maintains private workshops accessible only to himself, spaces where he conducts his most radical experiments without observation or interference. The creations that have emerged from Rakarth's laboratories over the millennia demonstrate capabilities that push the boundaries of what even other Haemonculi consider possible. His work on Space Marine gene seed represents perhaps his most significant achievement in the realm of xenobiological study. Acquiring samples of Astartes' genetic material requires tremendous effort and risk, as the Space Marines guard their gene seed with fanatical devotion, and the loss of even a single sample triggers extensive recovery operations. Rakarth has accumulated samples from multiple chapters through carefully planned raids and arrangements with other Drukhari forces. His laboratories contain gene seed from first founding chapters, including the Ultramarines, Blood Angels, and Dark Angels, as well as samples from numerous successor chapters, and even Traitor Legion stock that dates back to the Horus Heresy. The analysis of this genetic material revealed to Rakarth the sophisticated biological engineering employed by the Emperor during the creation of the Primarchs and the subsequent development of Space Marine enhancement procedures. He documented the function of each of the 19 implanted organs that transform a human adolescent into an Astartes, mapping their interactions and understanding how they integrate with baseline human physiology. This knowledge allowed him to attempt his own modifications to the gene seed, experiments aimed at creating enhanced versions or adapting the technology for use in non-human subjects. Most attempts ended in catastrophic failure, the modified gene seed rejecting host bodies or triggering uncontrolled mutations that killed the subjects within hours. A few experiments produced viable results, creating beings that combined Astartes enhancements with other modifications in ways that should not function according to established biological principles. One particular creation demonstrated Rakarth's mastery over gene seed manipulation in ways that horrified even other Haemonculi who learned of it. He successfully implanted modified Space Marine organs into an Eldari subject, adapting the gene seed to function within Xeno's physiology through extensive genetic restructuring. The resulting hybrid possessed enhanced strength and durability that approached Astartes levels while maintaining the speed and agility inherent to Eldari biology. The creation survived for several months before its body finally rejected the foreign organs, but those months provided Rakarth with extensive data on cross-species genetic compatibility and the limits of biological adaptation. He has not attempted to recreate this particular experiment, viewing it as a proof of concept rather than a practical application, though the knowledge gained informs his ongoing work with hybrid physiologies. The perfection of the grotesque template represents another area where Rakarth's contributions exceed those of his peers. While other Haemonculi create grotesques through fusion of multiple subjects and extensive augmentation, their creations typically require constant maintenance and suffer from limited operational lifespans. Rakarth developed techniques that stabilize the fusion process, creating grotesques that maintain functionality for years rather than months and require minimal ongoing treatment to prevent rejection responses. His methods involve more sophisticated genetic modification of the component subjects before fusion begins, adjusting their DNA to increase compatibility and reduce the likelihood of immune reactions. He also refined the neural integration process, creating more efficient connections between the merged nervous systems that improve the grotesque's combat effectiveness and response times. The grotesques produced through Rakarth's perfected methods function as elite warriors within the Prophets of Flesh, their capabilities exceeding standard grotesque templates significantly. These enhanced constructs display improved cognitive function despite their simplified neural architecture, allowing them to execute more complex tactical maneuvers and adapt to changing battlefield conditions. Their enhanced durability means they survive engagements that would destroy lesser grotesques, accumulating combat experience that further improves their effectiveness. Some of Rakarth's oldest grotesques have served for decades, their bodies bearing the scars of countless battles, while their performance continues to exceed newer creations. These veteran constructs have become something approaching individuals, their simplified consciousness developing personality quirks and preferences that distinguish them from freshly created grotesques. Rakarth's experiments extend far beyond modifications to existing life forms, encompassing attempts to create entirely new species from base genetic material. His laboratories contain vats where proto-organisms develop, creatures designed from fundamental principles rather than adapted from existing biology. These experiments pursue various goals: creating organisms optimized for specific environments, developing biological weapon systems that can reproduce and spread independently, or simply exploring the boundaries of what living tissue can be shaped to accomplish. Most attempts produce non-viable organisms that die within hours or days of achieving consciousness, their biological systems too radical to maintain stability. The few successful creations often prove too unpredictable for practical deployment, their behavior patterns too alien even for the Haemonculi to control reliably. One successful creation that achieved limited deployment consists of floating organisms that serve as living sensor platforms. These creatures resemble jellyfish in their basic structure, translucent bodies filled with lighter-than-air gases that provide buoyancy in standard atmospheric conditions. Sensory organs cover their surfaces, providing comprehensive awareness of their surroundings through multiple perception modes. The creatures drift through areas under observation, their presence often mistaken for natural phenomena or overlooked entirely due to their translucent nature. They transmit sensory data to Rakarth through psychic connection, their simple nervous systems incapable of complex thought but perfectly suited for information gathering. These sensor organisms have proven valuable during raids and infiltration operations, providing advanced intelligence without risking more valuable assets. The relationship between Rakarth and Supreme Overlord Asdrubal Vect exemplifies the complex dynamics between the Haemonculi covens and Commorragh's political leadership. Vect rules the Dark City through a combination of military power, political manipulation, and strategic alliances that maintain his position atop Commorragh's brutal hierarchy. Rakarth represents both an invaluable asset and a potential threat to this power structure. The services he provides prove essential to Vect's continued survival and dominance. Rakarth maintains Vect's crucible, ensuring the Supreme Overlord can return from death should his enemies achieve his assassination. He provides enhanced warriors for Vect's personal forces, grotesques and modified racks that serve as elite bodyguards and shock troops. His expertise in toxins and biological weapons gives Vect options for eliminating rivals that leave no evidence pointing back to the Supreme Overlord. Yet this relationship exists in careful balance, as Rakarth's capabilities mean he could theoretically pose a significant threat to Vect's rule. A Haemonculus of Rakarth's skill could sabotage Vect's crucible, ensuring his next death becomes permanent. He could create biological weapons specifically tailored to Vect's physiology, toxins that would bypass the Supreme Overlord's various defenses and enhancements. The knowledge Rakarth possesses about Vect's body from maintaining his resurrection systems provides detailed intelligence that could be exploited by the Supreme Overlord's enemies. Both parties understand these dynamics, creating a relationship built on mutual benefit and mutual threat. Vect ensures that Rakarth receives privileges and resources that maintain his loyalty, while simultaneously maintaining contingencies should the Master Haemonculus ever move against him. Rakarth accepts Vect's dominance while ensuring his own position remains secure through the indispensability of his services and the multiple backup systems that would ensure his survival even if Vect attempted his elimination. The interactions between Rakarth and other Archons follow similar patterns of mutual exploitation and carefully maintained distance. Powerful Archons seek his services for various purposes: resurrection insurance through crucible creation, enhanced warriors for their cabals, or specialized biological weapons for use against specific enemies. Rakarth provides these services at prices that reflect both the value of his work and his assessment of each client's ability to pay. Payment takes various forms depending on the service requested and the client's resources. Some Archons provide rare specimens for Rakarth's experiments, captives from species he has not previously studied or individuals with unusual genetic characteristics. Others offer artifacts recovered from real space, technological or biological samples that might inform his research. The most valuable payment comes in the form of favors and political support, arrangements that give Rakarth influence within Commorragh's power structure, without requiring him to directly participate in the endless scheming that consumes the cabals. These relationships remain perpetually unstable, as archons who employ Rakarth's services simultaneously fear the leverage he gains through that employment. An archon who contracts with Rakarth for crucible creation places their immortality in his hands, trusting that he will maintain the device properly and not sabotage it at some future date. This vulnerability creates incentive for archons to eliminate Rakarth once they have obtained his services, removing the threat he represents. Yet such attempts invariably fail due to Rakarth's extensive precautions and backup systems. His laboratories contain defenses that can repel assault forces from even the most powerful cabals. His multiple crucibles and phylacteries ensure that killing his physical body accomplishes nothing permanent. Most significantly, his position as master of the prophets of flesh means any attack on him triggers response from the entire coven, bringing overwhelming force against the aggressor. Archons who understand these realities maintain their arrangements with Rakarth through continued payment and respect for the implicit boundaries that govern their relationship. The raids that Rakarth personally leads or participates in demonstrate his willingness to venture beyond Commorragh when sufficiently motivated by the prospect of acquiring rare specimens. Unlike many ancient Haemonculi who rarely leave their laboratories, Rakarth regularly travels through the webway to launch attacks on targets across real space. These raids focus on acquisition rather than simple slaughter, with Rakarth seeking specific individuals or creatures that possess characteristics of interest to his research. A raid might target an Imperial research facility rumored to house xenobiological samples, or a feral orc world where the greenskin ecosystem can be studied in its natural state. Rakarth personally oversees the capture of priority specimens, his presence on the battlefield ensuring that valuable subjects survive the raid intact enough for later experimentation. These expeditions showcase Rakarth's combat capabilities, which remain formidable despite his primary focus on research and creation. He wields a customized flesh gauntlet that incorporates refinements developed through millennia of use, its mechanisms responding to his thoughts with perfect precision. The weapon allows him to reshape enemy flesh with casual gestures, transforming attacking warriors into writhing masses of uncontrolled tissue growth, or simply liquefying their bodies from within. His additional arms mount various surgical implements and injection systems, providing options for engaging enemies at different ranges and with different effects. A Talos pain engine modified to his personal specifications accompanies him during raids, its pilot hand selected by Rakarth, and its weapon systems upgraded beyond standard configurations. This machine serves as both bodyguard and mobile laboratory, allowing Rakarth to perform preliminary examinations of captured specimens while still in the field. The reputation Rakarth has accumulated throughout Commorragh and beyond reflects both his accomplishments and the fear he inspires. Within the Dark City, his name carries weight that transcends even his position as master of the prophets of flesh. Other Haemonculi regard him with a mixture of professional respect and jealousy, acknowledging his superior skills while resenting the advantages his age and experience provide. Archons speak his name with careful neutrality, aware that showing either too much deference or too much dismissal could create complications in their relationship with him. The common Drukhari of Commorragh's lower levels whisper stories about Rakarth that have achieved legendary status, tales of his most spectacular creations, and the fate suffered by those who earned his displeasure. These stories, while often exaggerated, serve to reinforce his position within the Dark City's social hierarchy and discourage potential threats from testing his defenses. Beyond Commorragh, Rakarth's reputation extends to those few Imperial authorities who possess knowledge of the Dark Eldar and their internal structure. Inquisitors who study Xeno's threats maintain files documenting his activities and creations, marking him as one of the most dangerous individuals within Drukhari society. Space Marine chapters that have encountered his work in the field recognize the sophistication of his biological weapons and the threat posed by his experiments with gene seed. The few survivors of raids led by Rakarth carry memories of his presence on the battlefield, describing a towering figure who moved through combat with surgical precision, his multiple arms performing procedures on living enemies that transformed them into screaming monuments to his craft. These accounts, while fragmentary and often dismissed as exaggeration by those who have not witnessed Drukhari capabilities firsthand, contribute to the understanding that Rakarth represents a threat that transcends normal parameters of Xeno's danger. The deployment of Haemonculi covens in real space raids follows operational doctrines that differ substantially from the lightning-fast strikes favored by Kabbalite warriors or the gladiatorial displays preferred by witch cults. Where Cabals prioritize speed and overwhelming firepower to seize captives before enemy forces can mount effective resistance, and witches seek to maximize the spectacle of combat for the entertainment of watching audiences, the covens approach warfare as an extension of their laboratory work. Each engagement represents an opportunity to acquire specific specimens, test new creations under combat conditions, and harvest suffering on scales impossible to achieve within Commorragh's confines. The Haemonculi plan their raids with the same meticulous attention to detail they apply to surgical procedures, identifying targets that will yield optimal results for their research while providing tactical challenges that allow evaluation of their warrior construct's capabilities. The typical coven raid begins with extensive reconnaissance conducted through methods that reflect the Haemonculi's unique capabilities. They deploy their sensor organisms through webway portals, these floating creatures drifting through target areas while gathering intelligence on enemy dispositions, defensive capabilities, and population distributions. The data collected informs target selection, with the Haemonculi identifying locations that contain specimens of interest while possessing defenses weak enough to allow successful penetration. A research facility studying xenobiology might attract attention for its collection of alien samples. A hive city's underhive population provides opportunities to acquire subjects displaying various mutations and adaptations to toxic environments. Military installations offer chances to capture enemy soldiers whose training and conditioning make them valuable subjects for studying how discipline affects pain tolerance and psychological breaking points. The composition of coven raiding forces reflects their specialized nature and operational requirements. Unlike Kabbalite raids that rely on massed infantry supported by fast-moving vehicles, coven expeditions center on their warrior constructs and the Haemonculi who direct them. Racks form the basic infantry element, their pain immunity and enhanced durability making them ideal for sustained combat in environments where casualties would break conventional forces. These modified warriors advance in disciplined formations, their simplified neural architecture preventing the panic responses that affect unmodified soldiers when comrades fall around them. They carry weapons selected for their ability to incapacitate rather than kill outright, as the covens prioritize capturing enemies alive for later experimentation. Stunklo gauntlets deliver electrical shocks that paralyze targets without causing fatal damage. Net launchers fire weighted meshes that entangle enemies and deliver tranquilizing compounds through contact with skin. Even their more lethal armaments, the ossifactors and liquefier guns, can be calibrated to wound rather than kill when circumstances demand live captures. Grotesques serve as breakthrough elements and terror weapons during coven operations. The Haemonculi position these massive constructs at key points in their battle plans, using their size and strength to overcome defensive positions that would stall lighter forces. A grotesque can tear through barricades with its bare hands, the enhanced musculature and reinforced skeletal structure providing strength sufficient to bend plasteel or punch through ferrocrete walls. Their presence on the battlefield generates psychological effects that complement their physical capabilities. Enemy soldiers witnessing these towering forms advancing through fire that would kill normal warriors often break and flee, their morale shattered by the realization that conventional weapons prove insufficient to stop the assault. The grotesques' pain immunity means they continue their advance even when suffering wounds that would incapacitate or kill lesser beings, their bodies absorbing damage, while their simplified consciousness processes injury as mere sensory data, requiring no response beyond continued execution of orders. The deployment of pain engines and chronos constructs provides the covens with capabilities that other Drukhari forces lack. Talos pain engines function as mobile heavy weapons platforms and psychological warfare assets simultaneously. Their weapon systems deliver concentrated firepower that can suppress enemy positions or eliminate hardened targets like armored vehicles. The splinter cannons mounted on their arms fire streams of toxic crystalline shards that shred infantry formations, while their macro scalpels and chain flails prove devastatingly effective against enemy armor and fortifications. The psychic aura of suffering radiating from each Talos affects enemy morale in ways that conventional weapons cannot, sensitive individuals experiencing waves of sympathetic pain or sensing the torment of the pilot trapped within the machine's core. Against forces that include psychers, this effect intensifies dramatically. Imperial sanctioned psychers attempting to employ their abilities near active Talos engines report difficulty maintaining concentration, the screaming psychic presence of the trapped pilot disrupting their connection to the warp. Chronos parasite engines enable Coven forces to sustain operations far longer than would otherwise prove possible. These machines harvest the departing souls and pain essence of dying enemies, processing this psychic energy into sustenance that nearby Drukhari can absorb. A Coven raiding force operating with Chronos support can remain in real space for extended periods without requiring return to Commorragh for feeding. The warriors fighting near these engines experience enhanced vigor and accelerated healing, wounds closing with unnatural speed as the harvested essence flows through them. This capability proves particularly valuable during deep strike operations targeting locations far from established webway portals, or during extended campaigns where maintaining supply lines becomes problematic. The Chronos allows the Covens to establish temporary forward positions in real space, their forces operating from captured facilities, while the engines harvest essence from the local population to sustain the occupation force. The tactical application of these assets in urban warfare demonstrates the Coven's approach to combat in complex environments. Cities provide ideal hunting grounds for Haemonculi raids, their dense populations offering abundant specimens, while their tangled infrastructure creates opportunities for ambush and controlled engagements. The Covens establish multiple entry points through webway portals, opening passages in locations that allow them to bypass primary defensive positions and strike at vulnerable targets within the city's interior. Racks emerge from these portals and begin systematic clearing operations, moving through buildings and streets in coordinated sweeps that drive civilian populations toward predetermined collection points. The modified warriors prove ideally suited for close quarters combat, their enhanced strength allowing them to smash through doors and walls, while their pain immunity prevents the disorientation that affects normal soldiers fighting in confined spaces filled with smoke and debris. Grotesques serve as siege-breaking elements during urban operations, their massive frames and tremendous strength allowing them to create new routes through the cityscape when existing passages prove too well defended. A grotesque can punch through walls between buildings, opening pathways that allow rack forces to bypass fortified intersections or defensive positions. They tear down barricades that would require conventional forces to employ heavy weapons or explosives, their bare hands sufficient to reduce obstacles to rubble. In situations where enemy forces establish strongpoints in reinforced structures, the grotesques serve as living battering rams, their bodies absorbing defensive fire as they close distance and begin tearing apart the fortifications from outside. Some grotesques carry integrated demolition charges for use against particularly resistant structures. These explosive devices built into their torsos and detonated remotely when the construct reaches its target, the resulting blast eliminating both the grotesque and the defensive position it was sent to destroy. The use of webway portals in urban environments provides the covens with mobility advantages that conventional forces cannot match. The Haemonculi can open portals in locations that allow them to bypass enemy defenses entirely, appearing inside fortified positions or behind defensive lines without needing to fight through the intervening space. This capability proves particularly effective for establishing inescapable killing grounds, tactical situations where enemy forces find themselves surrounded with no avenue for retreat. The covens might open portals at multiple points around an enemy position, deploying forces that encircle the defenders, while additional portals cut off potential escape routes. The trapped enemies then face a choice between attempting to break through the surrounding Drukhari forces, which typically results in high casualties and eventual defeat, or surrendering in hopes of receiving mercy that the Haemonculi have no intention of providing. The creation of these killing grounds reflects the Haemonculi's preference for capturing enemies alive rather than simply eliminating them. The surrounding forces employ weapons and tactics designed to incapacitate rather than kill, using tranquilizer compounds, electrical shock weapons, and net launchers to disable enemies without inflicting fatal damage. Racks advance into the trapped formation, their enhanced strength allowing them to physically restrain struggling captives, while their pain immunity prevents enemy desperation attacks from deterring them. The grotesques serve as psychological pressure, their presence encouraging surrender by demonstrating the futility of continued resistance. Enemies witnessing these massive constructs advancing through fire that barely slows them often choose to throw down their weapons rather than face dismemberment by the grotesque's claws or incorporation into their mass through the Haemonculi's flesh crafting. The harvesting of captives during and after combat operations follows procedures refined through millennia of practice. The Haemonculi established temporary processing stations near the battlefield, locations where captured enemies undergo initial evaluation and sorting. Subjects displaying characteristics of particular interest receive immediate attention, the Haemonculi performing preliminary examinations to assess their suitability for specific experimental purposes. Others undergo basic categorization based on species, physical condition, and psychological state. The most valuable specimens receive careful preservation, placed in stasis fields or suspended in alchemical solutions that maintain their tissues in optimal condition for later work. Lesser captives face immediate conversion into racks, the Haemonculi performing field modifications that transform them into useful servants while eliminating the need to transport them back to Commorragh as prisoners. The weapon selection employed by Coven forces reflects their operational priorities and the nature of their combat doctrine. Unlike Kabbalite warriors who favor weapons that maximize kill counts and create spectacular displays of destruction, the Haemonculi choose armaments that provide options for both lethal and non-lethal engagement. The Stinger pistols carried by many rack units can fire crystalline projectiles coated with either lethal toxins or compounds that induce paralysis and unconsciousness. The liquefier guns mounted on some rack units and Talos engines can be calibrated to different intensity settings, from complete molecular dissolution to surface burns that incapacitate without killing. Even the close combat weapons employed by grotesques and racks receive modification to allow controlled application of force, their blades and claws capable of precise strikes that disable rather than dismember when circumstances require live captures. The integration of these weapon systems with the Coven's tactical doctrine creates operational flexibility that allows them to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. A Coven force encountering unexpectedly strong resistance can shift to more lethal weapon settings, prioritizing the elimination of threats over capture of specimens. Conversely, when facing weaker opposition that offers minimal threat, the Haemonculi can order their forces to emphasize non-lethal engagement, maximizing the number of captives taken for later experimentation. This adaptability extends to target selection during raids. The Haemonculi continuously evaluate the tactical situation and specimen acquisition rates, adjusting their forces' objectives based on how the operation develops. If a raid yields fewer valuable specimens than anticipated, they might extend the operation to hit additional targets or shift focus to different areas within the target zone that offer better acquisition opportunities. The terror operations conducted by the covens against Imperial and other forces demonstrate their understanding that psychological warfare can prove as effective as physical destruction. The Haemonculi deliberately cultivate their reputation for horrific practices, ensuring that stories of their activities spread through enemy populations and military forces. Survivors of coven raids return to their communities carrying memories of what they witnessed, describing the towering grotesques that shrugged off weapons fire, the disciplined rack formations that advanced without hesitation through killing zones, and the Haemonculi themselves performing procedures on captured comrades in full view of defending forces. These accounts, while often dismissed as exaggeration or the products of traumatized minds, contribute to a growing awareness among Imperial forces that encounters with Haemonculi covens represent threats qualitatively different from standard Xenos raids. The long-term psychological effects of coven operations extend beyond individual survivors to affect entire military units and civilian populations. Imperial Guard regiments that survive encounters with Haemonculi forces often display reduced combat effectiveness in subsequent engagements, their soldiers haunted by memories of what they witnessed and fearful of facing similar threats again. Civilian populations in areas that have experienced coven raids develop heightened anxiety and paranoia, their communities forever marked by the knowledge that such horrors exist and might return. The Haemonculi view these effects as valuable secondary objectives achieved through their operations, the ongoing suffering of survivors and affected populations, generating psychic emanations that feed them even after the raid concludes and they return to Commorragh. The coordination between Coven forces and other Drukhari factions during joint operations follows protocols established through contracts negotiated before deployment. When a cabal hires Coven support for a major raid, the agreement specifies exactly what services the Haemonculi will provide and what compensation they expect in return. The Covens might supply enhanced warriors to bolster the cabal's forces, grotesques and racks that serve as heavy assault elements during the operation. They provide specialized weapons and toxins tailored to the specific enemies the raid will encounter. Their Haemonculi might accompany the force personally, offering their flesh-crafting abilities for field modifications of Cabalite warriors or immediate conversion of valuable captives. In exchange, the Cabal agrees to provide the Covens with first selection from captured specimens, allowing the Haemonculi to claim subjects displaying characteristics of interest to their research before the remaining captives undergo distribution to other participants. These joint operations demonstrate both the strengths and tensions inherent in Drukhari inter-factional cooperation. The Coven's warrior constructs provide capabilities that Cabalite forces lack, their pain immunity and enhanced durability, making them ideal for assaults on heavily defended positions that would cause unacceptable casualties among conventional troops. The Haemonculi's weapons and expertise offer options for dealing with specific threats that Cabalite armaments cannot effectively engage. However, the fundamental differences in operational priorities between Cabals and Covens create friction during execution. Cabalite warriors prioritize speed and spectacle, seeking to complete raids quickly while maximizing the display of their martial prowess. The Haemonculi prefer methodical approaches that ensure optimal specimen acquisition and provide opportunities to test their creations under various conditions. These conflicting priorities require careful management through the command structure, with both factions making compromises to maintain operational cohesion while pursuing their individual objectives within the overall mission parameters. The independent expeditions launched by Covens without Cabal involvement follow different operational patterns that reflect their specialized nature and research focus. These raids target locations selected specifically for their specimen acquisition potential rather than their value as sources of slaves or plunder. A coven might launch an expedition to a death world where the native fauna displays unusual evolutionary adaptations, seeking to capture examples of these creatures for study and potential incorporation into their own creations. They might target a research station studying xenobiology, the facility's specimen collection, offering opportunities to acquire samples from species they have not previously examined. Imperial medical facilities treating unusual diseases or mutations attract coven attention for the patients they house, individuals whose conditions make them valuable subjects for research into biological weapons or enhancement procedures. These independent operations typically involve smaller forces than major cabal raids, as the covens focus on precision strikes against specific targets rather than large-scale invasions. A coven expedition might consist of a single homunculus accompanied by squads of racks and a few grotesques, supported by Talos or Chronos engines as needed for the specific mission parameters. The reduced force size allows for greater operational security and easier insertion through webway portals, while the specialized nature of coven warriors means they can accomplish objectives that would require much larger conventional forces. The Haemonculi leading these expeditions exercise direct command over all aspects of the operation, their personal involvement ensuring that specimen acquisition priorities receive appropriate emphasis and that valuable subjects survive capture intact enough for later experimentation. The philosophical underpinnings of Haemonculi culture trace their origins to the final days before the fall, when Eldari society had descended into such depths of depravity that entire philosophical movements emerged to justify and systematize the pursuit of ever more extreme sensations. The beings who would become the first Haemonculi rejected the spiritual practices that had dominated Eldari civilization for millions of years, turning away from the worship of their pantheon and the guidance of their seers. They viewed the traditional Eldari approach to existence as fundamentally flawed, a weakness that left their race vulnerable to the psychic predation that would eventually manifest as Slaanesh. In place of spirituality, they embraced a materialist philosophy that recognized only the physical universe and the flesh that inhabited it. Pain and suffering became their primary subjects of study, phenomena they approached with the detachment of scientists observing natural processes rather than the emotional engagement that characterized their kin's responses to such experiences. This divorce from traditional Eldari religious practices represents one of the most significant distinctions between the Haemonculi and other survivors of the Fall. The Craftworld Eldari maintain strict adherence to the path system, a structured approach to existence designed to prevent the emotional extremes that fed Slaanesh's birth. The Exodites abandoned technological civilization entirely, returning to simpler existences on frontier worlds where their connection to the natural world provides spiritual grounding. Even the Drukhari of the Cabals and witch cults retain vestigial connections to their pre-fall heritage, their pursuit of sensation and violence echoing the excesses that doomed their empire, even as they reject direct acknowledgement of that connection. The Haemonculi stand apart from all these groups through their complete rejection of spirituality in any form. They recognize no gods, follow no paths, and acknowledge no higher purpose beyond the pursuit of knowledge through the manipulation of flesh and the study of suffering. The interpretation of pain as both science and art forms the central pillar of Haemonculi philosophy. They understand suffering as a biological and neurological phenomenon, the result of specific stimuli triggering responses in nervous systems that evolve to signal damage and promote survival behaviors. This scientific understanding allows them to manipulate pain with precision, controlling every aspect of a subject's experience through targeted interventions in their neural architecture. Yet they simultaneously view pain as an art form, a medium for creative expression that offers infinite possibilities for variation and refinement. A Haemonculus might approach the same subject with both mindsets, first analyzing their nervous system to understand its baseline characteristics, then designing a sequence of modifications and stimuli that will produce a specific pattern of suffering, the entire process combining rigorous methodology with aesthetic sensibility. The competitive nature that dominates Haemonculi culture emerges naturally from this dual approach to their craft. When practitioners view their work as both science and art, comparison becomes inevitable. Each Haemonculus seeks to demonstrate superior understanding of biological principles while simultaneously creating works that exceed their peers in complexity, elegance, or sheer audacity. Reputation within coven society depends entirely on the quality and innovation displayed in one's creations. A Haemonculus who produces conventional grotesques or racks using established techniques earns minimal respect regardless of the technical proficiency they demonstrate. True recognition comes from pushing boundaries, developing new procedures that other practitioners cannot replicate, or creating constructs that achieve capabilities previously thought impossible. This competition manifests in various forms throughout Haemonculi society. The most direct expression occurs during formal presentations within covens, gatherings where members display their latest creations for evaluation by their peers. These events follow elaborate protocols developed over millennia, with strict rules governing presentation order, evaluation criteria, and the consequences of success or failure. A Haemonculus presenting a new creation must explain the techniques employed in its construction, demonstrate its capabilities through live testing, and defend their work against criticism from other coven members. The audience evaluates both the technical achievement represented by the creation and its aesthetic qualities, judging whether it displays sufficient innovation and artistry to warrant recognition. Success in these presentations enhances reputation and often leads to commissions from wealthy clients seeking similar work. Failure brings humiliation and potential loss of status within the coven hierarchy. The informal competition that occurs outside these structured events proves equally significant in shaping Haemonculi culture. Practitioners constantly compare their work to that of their peers, seeking to identify weaknesses in rival creations that might be exploited or techniques that might be adapted and improved. A Haemonculus who develops a particularly effective method for stabilizing hybrid physiologies will find their peers attempting to replicate and refine that technique, each iteration potentially surpassing the original in some aspect. This process drives continuous innovation throughout the covens, as no technique remains cutting edge for long before other practitioners develop improvements or alternative approaches that achieve similar results through different means. The most accomplished Haemonculi maintain their positions not through jealous guarding of their methods, but through constant development of new techniques that stay ahead of their competitors' efforts to catch up. The ancient traditions practiced within covens provide structure to this competitive culture while maintaining connections to practices that predate the fall. Many coven rituals trace their origins to the final centuries of the Eldari Empire, when the beings who would become the first Haemonculi gathered in secret societies to pursue their experiments away from the oversight of authorities who might have objected to their methods. These early practitioners developed ceremonial frameworks for their work, elaborate procedures that served both practical and symbolic purposes. The rituals helped ensure consistency in complex procedures that required precise execution, while simultaneously marking the practitioners as members of an exclusive group united by their pursuit of forbidden knowledge. When the fall came and these beings retreated into Commorragh, they brought their rituals with them, preserving traditions that now represent some of the oldest continuous cultural practices in the Dark City. The presentation of masterwork creations follows the most elaborate of these traditional ceremonies. When a Haemonculus completes a project they consider worthy of formal recognition, they announce their intention to present it to their coven through specific channels established for this purpose. The announcement triggers a sequence of preparatory activities, with the coven's leadership designating a date for the presentation and notifying all members of their expected attendance. The presenter spends the interim period preparing their creation for display, ensuring it functions at peak capability and rehearsing the demonstration that will showcase its abilities. Other coven members prepare as well, reviewing their knowledge of relevant techniques and formulating questions or challenges they might raise during the evaluation phase. The presentation itself occurs in specialized chambers within the coven's primary laboratory complex, spaces designed specifically for these gatherings. The architecture of these chambers reflects their ceremonial importance, with raised platforms for the presenter and their creation, seating arranged to provide optimal viewing angles for the audience, and integrated systems for recording the proceedings for later reference. The presenter begins by describing the conceptual foundation of their work, explaining what they sought to achieve and why existing techniques proved insufficient for their purposes. They detail the procedures employed during construction, identifying innovations or refinements they developed and explaining how these advances enabled capabilities that previous methods could not produce. Throughout this explanation, the creation itself remains on display, its form providing visual evidence of the techniques being described. The demonstration phase allows the presenter to showcase their creation's capabilities through direct testing. The specific nature of these demonstrations varies depending on what the creation was designed to accomplish. A combat-focused construct might face opponents in controlled engagements that test its fighting abilities under various conditions. A specimen engineered for extreme pain tolerance undergoes procedures designed to push its limits, the presenter demonstrating that it maintains function despite stimuli that would incapacitate unmodified subjects. Biological weapons receive testing against live targets that represent the enemies they were designed to combat, their effectiveness measured through precise observation of how quickly and thoroughly they achieve their intended effects. The audience watches these demonstrations with critical attention, noting both successes and any failures or limitations that become apparent during testing. The evaluation that follows represents the most significant phase of the presentation, as the audience questions the presenter about their work and debates its merits among themselves. Senior coven members lead this discussion, their experience and status giving their opinions particular weight. They probe for weaknesses in the presenter's methodology, identifying potential improvements or alternative approaches that might have produced superior results. They compare the presented creation to previous works by the same practitioner and by other coven members, assessing whether it represents genuine advancement or merely competent execution of established techniques. The presenter must defend their work against this scrutiny, answering questions and responding to criticism, while maintaining the composure expected of a master flesh crafter. Displays of defensiveness or inability to justify specific choices damage the presenter's reputation regardless of the creation's objective quality. The philosophical divide between Haemonculi, who view their work as pure science versus those who consider it dark artistry, generates ongoing debates that shape coven culture and influence how individual practitioners approach their craft. The scientific faction emphasizes systematic methodology and reproducible results, arguing that flesh crafting should follow rigorous experimental protocols that allow for verification and refinement of techniques. They maintain detailed records of their procedures, documenting every variable and outcome to build comprehensive databases of knowledge that can inform future work. Their creations prioritize functional effectiveness over aesthetic considerations, with form following function in configurations that maximize capability even when the results appear crude or inelegant to observers focused on visual appeal. The artistic faction counters that reducing flesh crafting to mere science ignores essential aspects of what makes the work meaningful. They argue that the greatest creations transcend functional requirements to achieve beauty or horror that resonates on levels beyond simple utility. A grotesque designed purely for combat effectiveness might perform its role adequately, but one crafted with attention to aesthetic principles becomes something more, a work that inspires awe or terror through its appearance as much as through its capabilities. The artistic practitioners emphasize individual vision and creative expression, viewing each creation as an opportunity to manifest their unique perspective through the medium of flesh. They resist standardization of techniques, arguing that rigid adherence to established procedures stifles innovation and reduces flesh crafting to mere technical execution rather than true artistry. These debates rage within covens during formal gatherings and informal discussions, with practitioners on both sides presenting arguments refined through millennia of philosophical development. The scientific faction points to the practical advantages their approach provides, the ability to train apprentices through systematic instruction and to replicate successful techniques across multiple creations. They note that artistic pretensions often result in creations that fail to perform their intended functions reliably, beauty achieved at the cost of effectiveness. The artistic faction responds that science without vision produces nothing worthy of remembrance, that the greatest haemonculi throughout history achieved recognition not through methodical application of known techniques, but through bold innovations that pushed beyond established boundaries. They argue that the scientific approach leads to stagnation, practitioners endlessly refining existing methods rather than developing fundamentally new approaches to flesh crafting. The reality acknowledged by the most accomplished practitioners involves synthesis rather than absolute commitment to either extreme. The greatest haemonculi combine rigorous methodology with creative vision, their scientific understanding of biological principles enabling artistic achievements that less knowledgeable practitioners cannot attempt. They recognize that effective flesh crafting requires both systematic experimentation to understand what techniques produce specific results and creative insight to identify novel applications or combinations that others have not considered. A haemonculus might spend decades conducting methodical research into neural architecture, accumulating data on how different modifications affect consciousness and sensation. They then apply this knowledge in creative ways, designing procedures that produce effects no previous practitioner achieved because no one else possessed both the technical understanding and the imaginative vision necessary to conceive such applications. The transmission of knowledge between generations of haemonculi reflects these philosophical tensions, with different masters emphasizing different aspects of the craft depending on their own perspectives. A scientifically oriented master trains apprentices through systematic instruction in established procedures, ensuring they understand the biological principles underlying each technique before allowing them to attempt variations or innovations. An artistically focused master might provide less structured guidance, encouraging apprentices to experiment and develop their own approaches while offering criticism that shapes their aesthetic sensibilities. Some masters attempt to provide balanced instruction that incorporates both perspectives, though achieving this balance requires exceptional teaching ability and often produces apprentices who themselves struggle to reconcile the competing demands of scientific rigor and artistic expression. The evaluation of other covens' work provides another arena where these philosophical differences manifest. When haemonculi from different covens encounter each other's creations, either through formal exchanges or during joint operations, they assess what they observe through the lens of their own philosophical orientation. A scientific practitioner examining an artistically focused rival's work might acknowledge its aesthetic qualities while criticizing its functional limitations or the inefficiency of techniques employed. An artistic practitioner evaluating scientifically oriented work might concede its reliability and effectiveness while dismissing it as uninspired or lacking in vision. These assessments influence reputation across coven boundaries, as word of particularly impressive or disappointing creations spreads through Commorragh's haemonculi community regardless of formal organizational divisions. The long-term evolution of haemonculi philosophy demonstrates how their culture adapts while maintaining core principles that have persisted since before the fall. New generations of practitioners bring fresh perspectives informed by their experiences and the changing context of Commorragh's society. Some young haemonculi, having grown up entirely within the Dark City's twisted culture, approach flesh crafting with attitudes that differ from those of ancient practitioners who remember the pre-fall empire. They might place less emphasis on the historical and cultural dimensions of their work, viewing it primarily through practical or aesthetic lenses, without the weight of tradition that shapes older haemonculi's perspectives. Others deliberately embrace ancient practices, seeking to preserve techniques and philosophical frameworks that they fear might be lost, as the eldest practitioners eventually succumb to permanent death despite their resurrection systems. The debates surrounding the proper role of technology in flesh crafting illustrate how new challenges generate philosophical discussion within Haemonculi culture. Traditional approaches emphasize biological manipulation with minimal mechanical augmentation, the flesh crafters viewing their work as fundamentally about mastery over living tissue rather than integration of synthetic components. However, some practitioners argue that incorporating advanced technology enhances what flesh crafting can achieve, allowing for capabilities that purely biological systems cannot match. This technological faction points to successful hybrid creations that combine organic and mechanical elements, arguing that arbitrary restrictions on available tools limit the craft's potential. The traditional faction responds that excessive reliance on technology represents a failure of flesh crafting skill, that a true master should be able to achieve any desired result through biological manipulation alone. These arguments remain unresolved, with different covens and individual practitioners adopting positions across the spectrum between purely biological and extensively technological approaches. The raids conducted by Haemonculi covens against Imperial worlds follow patterns that distinguish them from typical Drukhari, attacks through their specific targeting priorities and methodical execution. Where Kabbalite forces strike population centers to maximize slave captures, the Haemonculi focus their attention on facilities that house materials or subjects of particular research value. Adeptus Mechanicus Forge worlds represent prime targets for these operations, their manufactorums and research complexes containing technologies and biological samples that the Haemonculi cannot easily acquire elsewhere. The tech priests' extensive cybernetic modifications make them subjects of interest, their hybrid nature providing opportunities to study how machine components integrate with human physiology. The Forge world stockpiles of rare materials, from exotic metals to radioactive compounds used in plasma reactor construction, offer resources that enable experiments impossible with more common substances. The approach to Forge world raids demonstrates the Haemonculi's capacity for patience and thorough planning. These facilities maintain defensive capabilities that would shred conventional raiding forces, their Skidari defenders equipped with sophisticated weapons, and the Forge complexes themselves protected by void shields, automated defense systems, and garrisoned Titan legions in some cases. The covens conduct extensive reconnaissance before attempting penetration, deploying their sensor organisms through webway portals opened in remote locations to map defensive positions and identify vulnerable access points. They study patrol patterns, analyze power distribution networks to locate critical systems, and catalog the types of technology housed in different sections of the Forge complex. This intelligence-gathering phase might extend for months or years, the Haemonculi displaying none of the impatience that characterizes younger Drukhari warriors as they accumulate the information necessary for a successful strike. The actual raid begins with surgical precision rather than overwhelming force. The covens open portals directly into sections of the Forge world, identified during reconnaissance as containing priority targets while possessing minimal defensive coverage. A strike team might materialize in a research laboratory studying xenobiology, their racks immediately securing the facility, while the accompanying Haemonculus evaluates the specimens and data archives present. Another team appears in a manufactorum producing specialized equipment, their objective to seize examples of the technology and capture tech priests familiar with its operation. The simultaneous multi-point insertion creates confusion among defenders, who struggle to coordinate responses when attacks manifest throughout their facility without warning. The Haemonculi exploit this confusion ruthlessly, their forces securing objectives and withdrawing through webway portals before the Mechanicus can concentrate sufficient force to overwhelm them. The targeting of specific Mechanicus installations reflects the Haemonculi's understanding of what the Imperium's tech priests value and where they conduct their most sensitive research. Biologist facilities studying Xenos organisms or attempting to understand alien physiologies attract particular attention, as these locations house specimens that the Haemonculi wish to examine using their own methods without the limitations imposed by Mechanicus doctrine. Genitor laboratories researching human genetic modification or attempting to recreate lost enhancement procedures provide insights into imperial biological science that inform Haemonculi understanding of their enemies' capabilities. The most daring raids target facilities rumored to house archaeotech, or samples from the dark age of technology, artifacts whose study might reveal principles that even the Haemonculi have not mastered. Imperial medical facilities across the galaxy face their own category of Haemonculi attention, though these strikes typically involve smaller forces than Forge World operations. Hospitals treating unusual diseases or genetic conditions house patients whose afflictions make them valuable research subjects. The Haemonculi seek individuals displaying rare mutations, victims of exotic pathogens, or survivors of injuries that triggered unusual healing responses. These subjects provide data on how human physiology responds to various stresses and how genetic variations affect disease progression or recovery capabilities. A single hospital raid might yield dozens of patients with conditions that the Haemonculi have not previously studied, each one offering opportunities to expand their understanding of human biology and potentially identify weaknesses that could be exploited in the development of targeted biological weapons. The capture of Imperial Guard regiments during planetary invasions or void engagements provides the covens with military specimens whose training and conditioning make them valuable for specific research purposes. The Haemonculi study how military discipline affects pain tolerance and psychological breaking points, subjecting captured guardsmen to procedures designed to overwhelm their training and reduce them to screaming wrecks. They document the effectiveness of different torture methodologies against subjects conditioned to resist interrogation, accumulating data that informs the development of techniques capable of breaking even the most determined resistance. Some captured guardsmen undergo conversion into racks, the Haemonculi comparing the results of transforming trained soldiers versus civilian subjects to determine whether military experience produces superior warrior constructs. The encounters between Haemonculi covens and the Adeptus Astartes represent some of the most significant interactions between these Xenos flesh crafters and Imperial forces, driven by the Haemonculi's obsessive interest in space marine biology and the extraordinary difficulty of acquiring Astartes subjects for study. Space Marines represent the pinnacle of human biological enhancement, their bodies transformed through the implantation of gene seed organs that grant capabilities far exceeding baseline human potential. The Haemonculi recognize the sophistication of this enhancement process, understanding that the Emperor's genetic engineering during the creation of the Primarchs and the subsequent development of space marine modification procedures achieved results that even their own flesh-crafting struggles to replicate. This recognition drives an intense desire to acquire Astartes specimens and gene seed samples, materials that might reveal techniques applicable to their own work. The capture of Space Marines requires operations that exceed the difficulty of standard raids by orders of magnitude. Astartes warriors possess enhanced strength, durability, and reaction speeds that make them extraordinarily dangerous opponents even when outnumbered. Their power armor provides protection against most weapons employed by rack infantry, requiring concentrated fire from Talos Pain engines or direct engagement by grotesques to penetrate. Their training emphasizes squad cohesion and mutual support, making it difficult to isolate individual Marines for capture. Most significantly, Space Marines display fanatical determination that prevents them from surrendering even when facing certain death. Their indoctrination and psychological conditioning, creating warriors who view capture as a fate worse than death, and who will fight to their last breath rather than allow themselves to be taken alive. The covens employ specific tactics designed to overcome these challenges when they identify opportunities to engage Space Marines under favorable conditions. They avoid direct confrontation with full Astartes forces, recognizing that even their enhanced warrior constructs cannot reliably defeat Space Marines in open battle. Instead, they seek situations where Marines have become separated from their brothers, or where injuries have weakened them sufficiently to make capture feasible. A Space Marine who has exhausted his ammunition and suffered damage to his armor becomes a potential target, though even in this diminished state, he remains a formidable opponent requiring multiple grotesques or a Talos engine to subdue. The Haemonculi employ weapons designed to incapacitate rather than kill, using toxins tailored to affect Astartes' physiology or electromagnetic pulses that disable power armor systems without necessarily killing the occupant. The few successful captures of Space Marines that have occurred provide the Haemonculi with subjects whose value exceeds almost any other specimen they might acquire. A captured Astartes undergoes extensive examination before any modifications begin, the Haemonculi documenting every aspect of his enhanced physiology in exhaustive detail. They map the locations and functions of all implanted organs, studying how the gene seed modifications integrate with baseline human biology. They analyze the Marine's enhanced bone structure, examining how the os medulla organ has reinforced his skeleton and increased his physical resilience. The biscopia and magnificat organs that enhanced his musculature receive particular attention as the Haemonculi seek to understand the mechanisms by which these implants generate strength that exceeds what their own muscle enhancement techniques typically achieve. The psychological aspects of Space Marine conditioning prove equally fascinating to the Haemonculi, who recognize that the Astartes' mental fortitude represents as significant an enhancement as their physical modifications. They subject captured Marines to procedures designed to break through their indoctrination, testing the limits of their pain tolerance and psychological resistance. These experiments typically fail to achieve the complete psychological breakdown that the Haemonculi can inflict on normal humans, as Space Marine mental conditioning provides resilience that even the most sophisticated torture struggles to overcome. The Marines' hypnotic training allows them to enter trance states that reduce their awareness of pain, while their Susan membrane organ can induce suspended animation that protects them from certain types of physical trauma. These defensive capabilities frustrate the Haemonculi while simultaneously increasing their interest in understanding the techniques that produce such mental fortitude. The acquisition of gene seed represents the ultimate prize when Haemonculi forces engage Space Marines, as these genetic organs contain the encoded information necessary to create new Astartes and potentially reveal secrets of the Emperor's biological engineering. Gene seed proves extraordinarily difficult to acquire intact, as Space Marines protect these organs with religious fervor, and their chapter protocols emphasize gene seed recovery from fallen brothers even at significant tactical cost. A Marine who realizes capture has become inevitable will often attempt to destroy his own gene seed organs rather than allow them to fall into enemy hands, using his remaining strength to inflict fatal damage to his own body in ways that render the organs unusable. The covens must move with exceptional speed when attempting to extract gene seed from captured or recently killed Marines, preserving the organs before they degrade or before the Marines' brothers mount recovery operations. The few gene seed samples that Haemonculi have successfully acquired over the millennia reside in the most secure sections of their laboratories, preserved in stasis fields and studied with obsessive attention to detail. Urian Rakarth maintains the most extensive collection, his samples including gene seed from multiple first founding chapters and even fragments of Traitor Legion stock dating back to the Horus Heresy. These samples provide material for experiments that attempt to understand the fundamental principles underlying Space Marine enhancement and to identify potential applications for Haemonculi flesh crafting. Most experiments end in failure, as the gene seed proves remarkably resistant to modification, and attempts to adapt it for use in non-human subjects typically result in catastrophic rejection responses. The successful experiments, while rare, have produced results that inform ongoing Haemonculi research into enhancement procedures and biological weapon development. The relationship between Haemonculi covens and the forces of chaos represents one of the most complex and contradictory aspects of their interactions with the wider galaxy. The Haemonculi reject all forms of worship and spiritual practice, viewing the chaos gods as they view all deities, irrelevant to their work and unworthy of acknowledgement beyond recognition of their existence as powerful warp entities. This philosophical position places them in fundamental opposition to chaos forces, whose entire existence revolves around service to and empowerment by the ruinous powers. Yet practical considerations sometimes create situations where Haemonculi and chaos forces interact, though these encounters more often result in conflict than cooperation, as each side pursues objectives incompatible with the other's interests. The Haemonculi's perspective on chaos corruption stems from their materialist philosophy and their understanding of biological processes. They recognize demonic possession and chaos mutation as warp-based phenomena that operate according to principles fundamentally different from the flesh-crafting techniques they employ. Where Haemonculi modifications follow systematic procedures that produce predictable results through manipulation of physical matter, chaos corruption introduces unpredictable warp energies that transform flesh according to the whims of entities beyond mortal comprehension. This unpredictability offends the Haemonculi's sensibilities, as it represents a loss of control over biological processes that they view as their exclusive domain. A subject corrupted by chaos becomes useless for most Haemonculi research purposes, their transformed flesh contaminated by warp energies that interfere with conventional modification techniques. The documented instances of Haemonculi capturing chaos-corrupted subjects for study reflect their scientific interest in understanding warp-based biological modification even as they reject its practical application. They have acquired possessed cultists, their bodies serving as hosts for lesser demons, and subjected these specimens to examination that attempts to understand the mechanisms by which warp entities interact with physical matter. These studies prove extraordinarily dangerous, as the demons retain their malevolent intelligence and actively resist the Haemonculi's attempts to analyze them. Some experiments have resulted in the demon breaking free from its host body and attacking the researchers, requiring intervention by coven security forces to contain the threat. Despite these risks, the Haemonculi continue their research, driven by their compulsion to understand all forms of biological modification, regardless of their origin or the dangers involved in studying them. The acquisition of Chaos Space Marines presents even greater challenges than capturing Loyalist Astartes, as the traitor Marines combine the enhanced capabilities of their gene seed with the unpredictable powers granted by chaos corruption. The Haemonculi recognize that Chaos Marines might provide insights into how warp energies interact with Astartes' physiology, potentially revealing weaknesses that could be exploited against Loyalist Space Marines. However, the corruption that empowers these traitors also makes them unsuitable for most conventional research purposes, their flesh twisted by warp energies in ways that prevent meaningful comparison to baseline Astartes biology. The few Chaos Marines that Haemonculi have successfully captured typically undergo immediate vivisection rather than extended study, the researchers extracting what information they can from the physical examination before the subject's warp-tainted nature creates complications that force termination of the research. The mutual enmity between the Haemonculi and Slaanesh represents the most significant point of conflict between the flesh crafters and chaos forces. The Dark Prince claims all Eldari souls, including those of the Drukhari who escaped the fall by retreating into the webway. The Haemonculi understand that upon their final death, assuming all their resurrection systems fail, their souls will be consumed by She, who thirsts just as the souls of their kin were devoured during the fall. This knowledge drives their obsessive pursuit of immortality through crucibles and phylacteries, each backup system representing another barrier between themselves and the eternal torment that awaits them in Slaanesh's realm. The Dark Prince views the Haemonculi's resistance as an affront, their continued existence representing souls that should rightfully belong to the Chaos God, but which have escaped through their flesh-crafting prowess. This fundamental conflict manifests in various ways throughout the Haemonculi's interactions with the galaxy. Slaaneshi demons display particular hostility toward Haemonculi when encountering them, the entities attacking with fury that exceeds their normal aggression toward other enemies. The Chaos God's mortal followers, particularly those who practice their own forms of body modification and flesh crafting in service to Slaanesh, view the Haemonculi as rivals whose techniques represent corruption of practices that should serve the Dark Prince. These cultists sometimes attempt to capture Haemonculi to offer them to their patron deity, though such attempts invariably fail due to the Fleshcrafter's extensive defenses and resurrection systems. The rare occasions when Slaaneshi forces have successfully destroyed a Haemonculus's physical form have resulted in the entity's consciousness transferring to backup systems, denying the Chaos God the satisfaction of claiming their soul. The documented instances of Haemonculi working with non-Drukhari forces remain exceptional cases that occurred under circumstances where both parties identified mutual benefit sufficient to override their normal hostility. These arrangements never involve genuine alliance or trust, but rather temporary cooperation where each side pursues its own objectives while accepting the other's presence as necessary for achieving their goals. The Haemonculi approach such situations with extreme caution, recognizing that their temporary partners will betray them the moment circumstances make such betrayal advantageous. They maintain escape routes and defensive measures throughout any cooperative operation, prepared to withdraw instantly if the arrangement shows signs of collapsing into open conflict. The mercenary contracts that Haemonculi occasionally accept from non-Drukhari clients demonstrate their willingness to provide services for appropriate compensation regardless of the client's species or allegiance. Rogue traders operating in the eastern fringes have reportedly contracted with Haemonculi for various purposes, from acquiring exotic biological weapons to obtaining medical services that imperial authorities would consider heretical. These arrangements typically occur through intermediaries who establish initial contact and negotiate terms, as few non-Drukhari possess the knowledge or connections necessary to approach a coven directly. The Haemonculi demand payment in forms that reflect their research interests: rare specimens, genetic samples from species they have not previously studied, or access to locations that house materials of interest to their work. The provision of flesh crafting knowledge to non-Drukhari represents the most controversial form of Haemonculi cooperation with outside forces, as it involves sharing techniques that the covens normally guard with obsessive secrecy. The few documented cases where this has occurred involved clients who possessed something the Haemonculi desperately wanted and who proved willing to trade knowledge for knowledge. A tech priest Hirtek seeking to understand Xeno's biological engineering might offer access to archaeotech samples in exchange for instruction in basic flesh crafting principles. A chaos sorcerer researching the fusion of warp energies with biological modification might provide demonic lore in exchange for Haemonculi expertise in hybrid creature creation. These exchanges remain limited in scope, with the Haemonculi providing only enough information to satisfy the agreement while withholding the deeper knowledge that would allow the client to achieve true mastery of the techniques. The rumored assistance that certain Haemonculi have provided to individuals seeking forbidden knowledge of biological manipulation reflects the Fleshcrafter's occasional willingness to share their expertise when sufficiently intrigued by a potential student or adequately compensated for their instruction. These arrangements differ from standard mercenary contracts in that they involve actual teaching rather than simple provision of services or materials. The Haemonculus accepts an apprentice from outside Drukhari society, providing instruction in flesh-crafting techniques in exchange for payment and the opportunity to study how non-Eldari minds approach the craft. These arrangements prove extraordinarily rare, as most Haemonculi reject the notion of teaching their arts to lesser species, whose lifespans and cognitive capabilities cannot support the decades of study required to achieve even basic competence. The few non-Drukhari who have received such instruction and survived the experience emerge transformed by the knowledge they gained. Their understanding of biology and their willingness to experiment on living subjects, marking them as threats that imperial authorities classify among the most dangerous heretics. These individuals typically establish their own laboratories in remote locations where they can practice their acquired techniques without interference, creating their own versions of the horrors that populate Haemonculi workshops. The Haemonculi who taught them maintain no ongoing connection to their former students, viewing the instruction as a completed transaction rather than the beginning of a lasting relationship. They sometimes monitor their students' subsequent work with professional interest, curious to observe how non-Eldari practitioners apply the techniques they learned, and whether they develop innovations that might prove worth studying. The long-term implications of Haemonculi interactions with the wider galaxy extend beyond individual raids or temporary arrangements to affect the strategic balance of power in regions where they operate regularly. Imperial worlds that have experienced multiple Coven raids develop heightened security measures and specialized defensive protocols designed to counter Haemonculi tactics. Forge worlds strengthen their internal security, implementing procedures that make it more difficult for raiders to penetrate research facilities undetected. Medical installations establish rapid response teams trained to defend against attacks targeting their patient populations. These defensive improvements force the Covens to adapt their own tactics, creating an ongoing cycle of measure and countermeasure that drives innovation on both sides. The knowledge that Imperial forces have gained about Haemonculi capabilities through these repeated encounters informs their understanding of the Drukhari threat more broadly. Inquisitors studying Xeno's threats recognize that the Covens represent a different category of danger than the Cabals or witch cults. Their sophisticated biological weapons and willingness to conduct long-term operations requiring different defensive approaches than those effective against conventional raiders. Space Marine chapters that have encountered Haemonculi forces develop specific tactical doctrines for engaging these enemies, emphasizing the importance of preventing captures and recovering gene seed from fallen brothers before the flesh crafters can acquire it. These institutional responses demonstrate how Haemonculi activities shape Imperial military doctrine in regions where they operate regularly. The Haemonculi themselves view their interactions with the wider galaxy through the lens of their research interests and their position within Commorragh's society. Each raid represents an opportunity to acquire specimens and materials that advance their understanding of biology and enhance their reputations within their covens. Each encounter with powerful enemies like Space Marines provides data on how their creations perform against the galaxy's most formidable warriors, information that informs future modifications and improvements. The occasional arrangements with non-Drukhari forces offer chances to study alien approaches to biological manipulation and to acquire resources unavailable through conventional Drukhari raiding. All these activities serve the Haemonculi's ultimate goal, the pursuit of mastery over flesh and the achievement of true immortality through their craft. The Haemonculi stand as living monuments to the depths of depravity that intelligent beings can reach when they abandon moral constraints and devote themselves entirely to the pursuit of knowledge without ethical limitation. They have survived for millennia through their mastery of biological manipulation, their understanding of pain and suffering, and their willingness to experiment on living subjects without hesitation or remorse. Their laboratories contain horrors that would break the sanity of most beings who witness them. Their creations demonstrate capabilities that should not exist according to natural law, and their accumulated knowledge represents one of the most comprehensive understandings of biology in the galaxy. They remain forever bound to Commorragh and the eternal struggle against she who thirsts, their existence sustained through the suffering they inflict and the elaborate systems they have developed to cheat death. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the Haemonculi endure as architects of agony, their flesh forges burning bright with the screams of their victims, their pursuit of perfection through pain continuing without end.